It's not physical stuff surrounding us that limits our flourishing. It's our ideas and our ability to modify them based on our knowledge of how to deal with stuff. And if you have the right ideas, those are the only way of solving anything. Without the right ideas, you can be given everything we can now conceive of, and you wouldn't be able to survive. But with the right ideas, you can be given almost nothing, and out of that you would build the most flourishing civilization in the history of humanity. I think that everything can be solved through further understanding. There's not a way of solving a problem if it is not through the understanding of what led to that problem. If you understand the causal mechanism that leads to your disease or your problem, let's say, you have an addiction to sugar, as we have talked about before, not you specifically, but if there's an addiction to anything in life, the way of solving it is through understanding the causal mechanism. What led to this? And if you can interfere in the causal mechanism, you can solve it. And what I'm saying that with the phrase that everything can be solved through further understanding is that sometimes people believe that it is through quitting thinking that you are going to solve a problem. But paradoxically, the realization that you should stop thinking is another thought arising among your thoughts. So this is mindfulness, basically. It's just the getting rid of the unnecessary thoughts in order to be able to focus in what matters. And but that realization has to occur through the emergence of an extra thought. So you have one more, and then that extra thought starts annihilating the rest of the thoughts. You have one, and that one takes power over the rest of the thoughts, and you instantly stop devoting your cognitive abilities to processing them, and you just focus in your breath. But it is always through the realization of a new thing that you are able to start correcting. And there was a video of you in which you talked about the fact that sometimes understanding doesn't solve a problem. But I don't see how this can be the case, because if it is not through understanding of the causal mechanism leading to something that you can solve it, what is it?
I'd like to start with a question back to you.
Okay.
What do you mean by everything, and what do you mean by solve? And linked to that, why do you want to solve everything?
Okay, this is complex because I would have to give a rigorous definition of solve and problem. And
yeah, well, not the definition of the word, but if you say it's more like I'd like to know what's happening inside of you. You know, when you say everything can be solved, what do you mean by everything?
By everything, I mean that what has led to a situation which is uncomfortable. Let's say that we equate discomfort with a problem. If you are having some negative feedback in some way, maybe that can be solved. Not in all the instances. Doing exercise is negative feedback because it's uncomfortable in the moment, but you have to deal with it in order to have more positive feedback in the long term. You are healthy. And so when there's a situation in which you are suffering or living with something negative, the solving of that problem, that thing that's not going as well as it could, based I'm saying good and bad in a very, very general way. What is
yeah, no problem.
So going towards what is good and separating yourself from what is bad has to be done through the understanding of the problem. And the solution, in my opinion, has to come through the, at least implicitly and subconsciously, the understanding of the causal mechanism leading to the problem. If you know what led to your house being burned, you can solve that problem in the next house and avoid it from being burned through the modification of the structure of the house, let's say.
To start with, I'm convinced that not everything can be solved. Because I was thinking about, have you heard of Zatsuje Rinpoche?
No, I have not.
Yeah, he's very interesting. He's not very well known. You know Rinpoche, the Tibetan Buddhist monk. It's like a teacher, like a sensei in the Japanese, Rinpoche. And this Chuge Rinpoche, he wrote a book called The Back Door to Enlightenment, which is very interesting. I read it like 10 years ago, I think. And I also saw a video of him at that time, a speech he gave. And his basic point was that in a certain sense, and it's also a basic tenet of Buddhism, life is suffering. But he was very practical about it. He had people in front of him in the seats, and he said, some of you probably at this moment are a bit suffering. Maybe your back is hurting. Maybe you're uncomfortable in the seat. Maybe you're a bit hungry. Stuff like that. I am a bit uncomfortable. I'm standing here. My feet are already, stuff like that. And that's something that cannot be solved. You cannot possibly solve all that suffering. So that's the first thing that came to my mind, because I kind of, when you said everything can be solved, I kind of was more interested in this, because I would like to know where it comes from. Not everything can be solved, impossibly. So then the next question is, what kind of things do you want to solve, and which ones are you not going to solve? And do you think that acceptance is a kind of solution? Because some stuff you can understand the causal mechanisms. I can understand the causal mechanisms of a lot of suffering in my life. Everybody suffers a lot. It's an integral part of living. If you wouldn't suffer, by the way, you wouldn't probably move an inch. You wouldn't think, you wouldn't do anything. It's suffering that is the motor of your actions, actually. And acceptance is, of course, a very tricky thing, because you might be accepting stuff that can be changed. Then it's not a solution. Then it's a kind of escapism. But accepting the stuff that cannot be changed is a kind of solution somewhere. So where do you place solving and accepting in your everything can be solved?
The quote you were mentioning, that life is suffering, I think the suffering is dukkha, and it has been translated also to unsatisfactoriness, which is very correlated with the current research on the hedonic treadmill and the fact that we get used to whatever we're exposed to. And this perfectly connects with what you were asking me for, which is, I think you are precisely right. There's two ways of not having a problem. One of them is through the keeping the standard of you having to have a good, let's say, fit body in order to be satisfied with yourself. And so the external way of solving this problem would be through having a regimen of good food, doing exercise, and sleeping well. And if you do that, you will have the external satisfaction, the external positive feedback of having the objective being fulfilled. But there's also an internal way of solving the problem. You can
I intervene just a moment?
Yep.
Even with a fit body, you will still suffer a lot. Yeah. And you will get even old and sick and die. And you will see people around you die. The people you love will die around you. And you will suffer a lot, and it cannot be solved. But I did interrupt you, so maybe you want to continue your train of thought.
Yeah, I think you're right. There's no body, no matter how healthy you are, you will eventually deteriorate into dust, and entropy will win. There's a guarantee that will happen. The universe will eventually, there will be a heat death of the universe, so everything will be obliterated into dust. But what I was saying is that there's an external way of satisfying your desire and an internal one. The external one requires you doing the thing, getting the body, getting the mate, getting the company, having the successful business, whatever the objective you can have. The external way of achieving it is through what I just mentioned. But there's also another one. And that one is getting rid of the need, accepting the current state of affairs, and just being content with what there is. And this other way of solving the problem is through the elimination of the problem. And this has a lot of overlap with via negativa. This is a concept I've talked about in previous podcasts, which is the elimination of what is not needed. If you are constantly in a need for coffee or tobacco or alcohol or any substance, you will be devoting to the getting of those things a big percentage of your resources. And if instead of devoting your resources to getting those substances and consuming them, you would just get rid of the consumption wholesale, you would save a lot of resources. And so it is through the elimination of the need, through the acceptance of the inexistence of that you make the whole left by the stopping of the consumption of that disappear. Let's say let's say you are used to consuming a hamburger every day and you stop doing that and you have the craving. But if you are mindful enough and you accept the discomfort of it and you are content with the situation you are in, which is not that easy. I see this argument could be said to an alcoholic which just gave up alcohol, and it would be ridiculous. Maybe there has to be a transition from consuming to not consuming. I don't know. But what I'm saying is that whatever discomfort you're going through, if you're mindful enough and you realize that the thing you are craving for is not actually furthering your long-term objectives, you would be able to just accept what you have and be content with it.
Yeah, I see what you mean. It's by the way, it's definitely something I do practically. It's one of my basic ways of doing. And I did have a few thoughts when you were talking about this. One is that you described more or less, again, like with mindfulness, you can be aware that your consumption of coffee or whatever isn't really making you happy, and that you could stop that. I would like to go back to my soothing of pain. It's we continuously are soothing pain, and if you are going to stop your consumption of coffee through how would I say, directing attention and conscious efforts, you will be able to do so, but the pain will remain, and you cannot live with pain all the time. So either you will go back to coffee and probably add a feeling of guilt to it, because now you feel stupid because you drink coffee, because you didn't go into the pain, you didn't understand yourself, or you will find something else. And instead of coffee, it will be soft drinks, or it will be whatever. Or it can be you started sports, and then you start exaggerating sports because it causes dopamine in your brain, and it makes you forget your pain for a while. And it's the thing where I would like to go back to this thing of pain. And I think now that I talk about it, it's actually for me the basis of Buddhism also. It's the recognition that pain is there and is an integral part of life. And I think being content starts with being content that you will be discontent.
Ooh.
You see what I mean? It starts with that. You have to be able to be content with the fact that you will be discontent regularly. You have to be okay with that. Which is, it sounds maybe paradoxical, but it's not. You know, like, maybe I'm okay now, but it won't last. And that's okay. It's okay. It won't last. I will feel bad again, and then it will pass, and I will feel a bit better, and you go on these waves.
I'm not being able to see how we can make compatible this with the performance at the highest level. And maybe there is, but let me rephrase my thought. If you are content and you have discovered a way of introspectively getting to the highest level of happiness and satisfaction with life, no matter what environment is. Let's say you are in a concentration camp like Viktor Frankl, and you're able to be absolutely enlightened and enjoying the moment and appreciating every instance of whatever happens in you, which is not the most horrendous. If you stop being whipped by a Nazi soldier 1 second, you appreciate that, and you're deep into your enjoying of the moment. Let's say, if you're able to get the worst situation and derive from it the highest level of well-being, why would you be incentivized to perform at the highest level to achieve new heights?
Yeah. And I don't know if I would describe the highest level of happiness like that. It sounds a bit to me more euphoric than happy. And in the concentration camp, I think if you're being really honest with yourself and in the moment and with yourself and real, then you will be unhappy. You will be unhappy in the concentration camp, and that will be your highest level of happiness. Apart from going into, I would call it psychosis. And it's personal. I think a lot of Buddhist people may be like not agreeing with me or outraged or something like that. But there is a very fine line, and I have seen it a lot in Buddhism, according to my own interpretation. I'm not a psychologist either, but as I see it now, I have seen a lot of what I would call a form of self-induced psychosis in Buddhism. And in all these kinds of spiritual and religious paths. And if you try to get yourself in a state where you can be happy, really happy in a concentration camp, I think you... how should I call it? I think you got rid of a part of you somewhere. And you didn't really get rid of it, by the way. It's somewhere there. Something in you is suffering. It is impossible for a human being that not something is suffering. And if you are not aware of that suffering in that moment when you're in the concentration camp, you're not being whole. And I think not being whole is a suffering in itself. So if you would have a state of happiness in that moment, or during that time in your concentration camp, you are not being whole, and that's not living, really. I don't know if I make myself more or less clear. It's not. I don't see that as happiness.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Because you intuitively perceive that there's something that could improve. You can rationalize a hypothetical scenario in which things would be better off, and the perception of something that would be better than this. We have an internal drive to improve our situation, and that's natural. That's perfectly good. Everyone should aspire to improve their situation. And in a concentration camp, which is the most horrendous situation I can think of, that's the state in which it is easiest to conceive of a scenario which is more positive, better for you.
Well, that's a very rational approach to it. I see it more pragmatic and visceral, in the sense that emotions and feelings are things that they happen to you. They happen to you, or they happen. You can even forget the you. They happen. It's your body and your mind and all of that. It passes through waves of states, which are induced by a combination of a lot of things that are in no way whatever under your control. And the result, if you want to see it like that, is these feelings, these emotions, these states. So what I would say is you're in the concentration camp, and these states will be there It's not even because you think you can improve, but I think I should explain then how I see the rational mind compared to the rest of your whole being as a human being. I think that would clarify a lot of things also. And you would be in those states and these emotions and these feelings, and the thing is just, well, you can do only two things with them: be with them while they are there, or not be with them. It's like visitors coming to your house. You can do two things with them. You can put them in one room and you in another room. Well, they're there, but you're not with them. Or you can be with them in the same room, but they are there. They are in your house. That's what happens to these feelings, these states. And then you can start interpreting and thinking about it could improve or not, or all these kind of things. But the basic thing is, it is there, and are you going to be with it or not? And I would define the highest state of happiness as being the most whole, the most aware with the most that there is in you, and being with it. That's how I would describe it now, in this point in my life. Will probably in 5 years' time it will be something else, and 5 years ago it was something else, because
I recently heard a podcast by Jordan Peterson, and he gave a definition of happiness that deeply resonated with me. Mm-hmm. It was the perception of progress towards an objective you value. And that is precisely what I've experienced in my past. Not in the sense of having had a lot of progress towards anything. I'm just saying that when I have perceived the progress, those are the instances in which I've been happiest. And when I've perceived the least progress, or even the backward going because of the noticing of negative feedback, I was doing something and I was pulled and I was investing my resources in a stupid way, you realize how much work there's left to achieve your objective, more now than before. Your expectation of how much work there's left varies. And this definition of happiness, I don't know how compatible it would be with being whole and being self-aware and mindful in general.
I think we're coming here, and I think it's kind of a realization that it really is different for different people. Your feeling of happiness is probably really different for you than it is for me. And I think that's also one of the basic things that we tend to not take into account, how different a planet every person is. So there is no definition, of course, of happiness, but it's interesting to put yours next to mine. But if we're going to try to define happiness point for all of humanity, because then that would be what we would be doing. Happiness is this. It's not possible also, I think. Yeah.
You pointed to the fact that there's an enormous variability across people, and I think you're right.
Yeah. Much more than we even think, I think.
How similar should two people be in order to be able to have a satisfactory relationship, be it friendship or a couple?
That's a good question. It's maybe one of the most important questions in human life, probably. I think a very short answer would be similar neural firings to similar events. That would be a very short, condensed answer, in my experience. In the sense that I try to make it a bit concrete. Imagine you're on the street and someone trips and falls down. Maybe I would be like preoccupied, and I would feel a bit bad for this person because they say "ow," and they have pain, and my companion would laugh out loud. Oh, that's really funny. He has a very different neural firing there. and there's no one to blame for one or the other, and one isn't better than the other. But it would probably, I wouldn't feel very connected to this person, and I wouldn't feel very at ease and safe and like I can be myself, because I just saw that this person reacts very different to the same situation. And this is just one example, but I think in general, the more you have this kind of compatible or similar neural firing to events, the more you will feel friendship. And by the way, I didn't really invent this. I came across a study quite some time ago where they saw that it happens the other way around also. So it's in a kind of positive feedback loop. So when you spend a lot of time with people, with friends, right? So they took people that had friends and then they followed them over a period of time, and they did like brain scans, MRI scans or something, and they became more similar over time. So that would be the very short answer. Well, of course, it's not very practical in a certain sense, because we're not going to take brain scans from people to see if they can be friends or not. But in the end, I think it boils down to this. Yeah.
One of the biggest variables that I've seen varies a lot across people is the level of curiosity. What I've noticed is that there's a big difference in that I tend to be able to, maybe not competently, but just be interested in everything, and others tend to have their topic or their set of topics, and if you take them apart from that, there's not a big connection, a thread of logic which transcends their specific topic. All of the topics ultimately are somewhat connected in that there's overlap in the logic that transcends the specific topic. And what I'm saying with this is that there's some logic, some curiosity towards everything that some people have. And I've seen this, for example, in Chris Williamson, the host of Modern Wisdom, or a lot of other people are very interested in many things. And would you think two people with a vast difference in the level of curiosity in general could have a satisfactory interaction?
No, I don't think so. I also have this experience that in my experience, I have a lot more broad and also deep curiosity in a lot of things that other people don't have. But I do wonder if it's mutual or not. I don't know, because to give maybe a bit like cliche example, you have these guys that are interested in football and cars, and I'm not interested in that. In a sense, I am interested in the psychology behind football and mass events, and I may be interested in the acrobatics of the sport and stuff like that. But I'm not interested that much in which team won yesterday and with how many points. And I don't have a big emotional investment in one team or another. And I could again be interested in why this is so. But these people have a completely other interest, and they have like their own curiosity in a certain sense, maybe. So I don't know the answer to that, but I wonder if they don't think the same of me as I think of them. That they think this guy isn't interested in anything. He isn't curious, because I am very curious about all kinds of cars, and there's a new car and I want to see which model it is and how it's called and how much it will cost and I don't know what and how many horsepower it has. And I'm not interested in this. And I wonder how the very personal experience of every person is, and that maybe it's the same. Maybe they just see us as people with very little interest in what their life consists of. They have, it's again, they're a planet on their own, and they have an interest in life. I think they're very interested in life, apart from depressed people, maybe, that's a clinical condition, but most people have an interest in life. They go through their day with interests and with motivations and trying to find out stuff. And I think they see me as someone who is like interested in nothing, like they talk to me about something and I say, he doesn't seem interested. I'm not really interested in that, and vice versa. So I do have this experience that you say, right, about being curious and also seeing links between things that other people and themes that other people don't seem to see. But I don't know if it's an absolute, and I don't know if we're ever going to find out, actually.
I think that understanding the thing that leads to this, I think what makes the difference between me and a lot of people I've talked to previously is the desire to escape from parochialism. What is only parochially relevant is not interesting to me at all. If what we're talking about doesn't transcend your situation, my situation, and our generation's situation, and our country, and if it does not apply universally, I don't see any value in it. And this is paradoxically false in some instances. For example, if I'm going to do the breakfast, of course I'm going to use some tools and some logic which transcends my doing of the breakfast. Heat is heat, no matter where I am. But the specific food I'm eating is that of mine. That food that doesn't transcend my situation. It's just I'm going to eat it, and that's where the interaction will end. So, and this conversation too, this is in two ways the most parochial and the least parochial thing in the universe, in the sense that it's local. It's the most local thing possible. And it doesn't have effects apart from here immediately, because the sound waves I'm emitting through expressing my thoughts are being diluted in my room, and they are not going to cause a big effect physically. And maybe I'm not being able to express my thoughts correctly, but I see a dichotomy here. Things are simultaneously, the things I'm interested in are simultaneously the most parochial and the least. And if something is parochial and the person who is talking about those things seems completely unable or unwilling to think of the thing that interests him that actually transcends them and the thing. Let's say you like football. The fact that you like football is very connected to the sense of tribalism and a connection, a group, a competition, the hierarchies of status that males produce in order to take the most competent one to the top, and then that's the way there's a selection, and not only across men. Exactly. I'm sure a similar phenomenon could maybe occur also among women. But what I'm trying to explain is that the thing that transcends football, the thing that is deeper than football, is this which I mentioned: the tribal instinct, the desire to have a group of people with whom there's a sense of community and with which there's a furthering of an objective. It has a deep connection with our evolutionary heritage, and this deeply transcends the instance of you liking football. The reason why you like football has nothing to do with football, and it has everything to do with the fact that you are an ape. And
yeah, you're right. I sometimes have a kind of controversial thought about this, because you mentioned earlier, not here, but in a mail you sent about social. What was it exactly? I think I noted it somewhere. More intelligence, less social skills, things like that. And I have a controversial thought around that I have the impression that, we haven't talked about this, but in some time in my life, I was diagnosed, if you can say it like that, how you call it, intellectually gifted. And I have the impression that it's something weird, this intellectual giftedness. Maybe we shouldn't go too much into it unless if you want to, but it's a weird concept. But it made me think about a lot of stuff during a few years. And I have the impression that I can do a lot of things relative to a lot of other people. I know this sounds really arrogant, but for instance, if I look at the workplace, I can do really a lot of things there. I can do from transporting cartons to making calculations, rather complex calculations, to managing people. I can do a bit of everything, and I see a lot of other people that can't do all this range of things. Yeah. And my controversial thought around this is that there's a kind of, in my experience, almost social obsession with a lot of people. And I think that maybe it has to do with the fact that they cannot do all these things, so they have to rely on others to get these things done in their life. So that makes them, it's their only resource they have. It's other people. If I need to transport cartons, I can do it. I don't need to have a good relationship with my neighbor, so he will do it for me. If I need to calculate something, I can do it. If I need to preview something, to make a forecast of something, I can do it. But it seems to me that and maybe this parochialism and this social efforts and all the resources go in there is because they have to do this together. You know, I have the impression I'm not interested in this at this point in my life, but if I would like to start repairing cars, I would be able to do it. So I don't really need a mechanic. At this moment, yes, but it's not like this existential feeling that if I don't fit in a society, that I'm lost. And I wonder if that's the motor for a lot of other people. And the very important thing there to note, however, is that one is not better than the other, you know. And there's a lot of, and that's why I think intellectual giftedness is a very weird subject, because there's intelligence is overrated, actually, I think. Yes, I really do think that intelligence, or the kind of intellectual intelligence, I think it's very much overrated. And it causes a lot of imbalance and unnecessary unhappiness and unnecessary comparisons that don't really go anywhere, you know. So people feel better or worse, also in weird directions where someone may be more intelligent intellectually and will have a problem with that. You know, you can feel guilty because you are perceived like that, or because you have this capacity, while it is in no way makes you a better being, in no way whatsoever.
Yeah, I think that we have to make a distinction. And I don't know how accurate this is. Maybe I'm just being politically correct and I'm just saying what feels good to say and I'm just bullshitting myself. And I don't really believe this. I'm not sure about this. I don't know if what I'm going to say now is just what feels good and what is nice to say and what will give me social acceptance, or if it is really what I believe. But I think that we should separate moral value from your intelligence. The fact that you are intelligent gives you, I'm not talking specifically about you, I'm talking about people who are intelligent are able to recognize patterns easier. The definition of intelligence I like the most is pattern recognition and prediction making. And more intelligence gives you the ability to recognize more patterns and make them more faster. You can recognize them faster and you can recognize a bigger amount and make more connections. And that is useful in a lot of ways. But if you do not recognize the pattern of good behavior, of having a long-term plan in which you take care of your family, of your friends, and you have a good community, and you behave virtuously, just doing the things that you know are good for the long term. Even if you, let's say you are a brilliant theoretical physicist, theoretical physicists are probably the smartest people in the world. I don't know of any other group of people who are systematically more intelligent than theoretical physicists. This is amazing. I haven't heard a single theoretical physicist talk and say, okay, this guy is dumb. No, that never happened to me. They are all higher than 113 IQ. That's the top 2%. The range, I think, determines the border between giftedness and non-giftedness. A relatively arbitrary border, but anyway, so we had to put a border somewhere. And where I'm going with this difference is that you might be able to recognize deep patterns of the functioning of the universe using the scientific method, but at the same time lose others, like moral values of why you should treat others well, why you should feed your children, why you should be kind to your wife or to your children or to your friends, or some basic notions of good humanity which give you the moral value, I think are correlated with IQ in some way, because if you're able to recognize a pattern, you would be able to see that treating others well is better than treating them bad. And I think that not recognizing it is what leads people naturally to be unkind to each other, because it feels good in the short term. You are building a short-term time frame of satisfaction of your needs, which leads to selfish and not selfish, sorry, but leads to narrow satisfaction of the needs, which is not actually fulfilling in the long term. And the recognition of a bigger pattern which transcends the moment is what allows you to build a project, an increase of the time frame, which makes your life better. And I'm trying to draw a distinction here between the contribution someone can make to theoretical physics and the value they have on a moral sense, on a personal level. If you're good with your children, with your wife, or with your husband, and with your family, and with your friends, and with your community, that is what gives you the moral value. If you are contributing on a good way in all these ways I've mentioned, this is different from, in some way there's an overlap, and in some other ways there's not. And so I have to make this distinction, and maybe this is just bullshit, and I'm just being politically correct, and I'm open to that idea. I'm not entirely sure. But where I'm going with this is that I would like to give the audience some background on IQ and intelligence. And I've been doing some research on this topic, and it's surprising. It's incredibly uncomfortable. And this is the most disgusting on a gut level. I was constantly, while doing this research, so disgusted because it goes against all the intuition we have of the equal value of everyone. And the conclusions I've derived from doing this research are outstanding to me. Before I knew this, I wasn't aware of this, and it was just so shocking. Let me just explain it. Maybe you're already aware of this, but I think this is so relevant that people should know it. So there's a distribution in IQ. And IQ is a score based on your ability to correctly respond to questions of logic. There's patterns recognized or not. And depending on your score, you get a number or another. And then you are ranked across with other relative scores. You have higher or lower scores with other people performing the same test, which are culturally independent, in the sense that they are blocks, like the Raven's matrices, the Raven's progressive matrices. It's an IQ test which is culturally independent, or is the most culturally independent it can get. And it's the most robust IQ test you can think of. Why is this so? Because it's cubes that move. And you have two pictures, and you have to predict which is the third one, let's say. And doing this with a lot of different levels of complexity and patterns that are less self-evident, you start realizing that people who have higher abilities to recognize the patterns tend to systematically do better in these things than others that are more in the average or lower than average. And what is shocking about this is not that you can rank people. You can do that with height or with width of the neck or whatever arbitrary variable you can think of. You can do it. But what blew my mind is that this pattern recognition ability is highly correlated among all of the psychological characteristics we value. So if you have a high level of verbal agility or a high level of vocabulary or a high level of a high level of speed in the recognition of an image, you are able to read a word fast if it's shown to you in 5 milliseconds and you're able to recognize. I don't know if 5 milliseconds it would be fast enough, too fast to recognize, or 50 milliseconds, let's say. The speed at which you are able to recognize this, an image or a word or a color or something, is correlated with all the other things we were talking about. And this absolutely blew my mind. And I think the correlation was 0.6. So if you're really good in one thing, the probability that you are good in the other ones is super high. So if you extract the variable which correlates all of the things that we value, being vocabulary, visual acuity, even this has also been correlated with the thickness of the myelin wiring of the neurons, which is mind-blowing. And the amount of supportive neurons that we have. This is correlated on a deep level. And the fact that there's a variable that is unique and that it is correlated with everything we value, and that it is a single measure which determines so much, is disgusting on an intuitive level, because it shows that there's a huge variance across people. And the fact that you are high in the distribution gives you all the benefits you can think of. You have lower probabilities of having an accident. You have higher probabilities of having high income. Your probabilities of staying in a long-term relationship and having it succeed are higher. All the things that we care about are correlated with IQ, positively for the higher rates and negatively for the lower ones. And this is so anti-egalitarian. And I think that evolutionarily we have an instinct of egalitarianism, and we want equality across our peers. And notice in this research that there's a huge variance in something so determinant of how valuable of a person you are or how useful of a person you are, or how well off you will be on average, and that it is extremely reliable. If you do an IQ test to someone when they're 18 and you do another one when they are 60, the correlation is huge. And the predictive ability of IQ on all the variables we care about, let's say income, professional development, the amount of knowledge, or any variable you can think of, is correlated with IQ. And this is disgusting, but it is the truth. It's just the fucking truth, and we have to face the truth. What do you think of this topic?
And why do you think it's disgusting?
Because it is anti-egalitarian.
I know what you mean, but it would be interesting to dive into this. But what is disgusting about it?
The thing that would make it not disgusting is that everyone was endowed with a blank slate when they were born. The blank slate is intuitively the best thing. It's amazing. It's the best idea you can think of. It's so comfortable to believe that everyone can do everything, and it all depends on our future behavior. We have all the agency in the world. So if you modify the environment of a baby in a certain way, you can make him be the best theoretical physicist in the world. And this is not the case. If you take an average baby and you train him, no matter how hard, and you get him the best professors in the world, you get him to Harvard, you get him the best diet and the best training and the best everything. If he's in the average, he will not be able to be a good theoretical physicist.
Of course. I would even say it would be child abuse for most people.
Yeah.
For most children, it would be child abuse to put them in Harvard and have them study physics with the best professors possible, because these kids, it's not what makes them happy. You know, yeah, it's very much true what you say, and I call it neurodivergence sometimes. So there is indeed a huge variability. And I mentioned earlier that maybe I would need to discuss where I place intelligence in the being of a person. I think morality is the same, and it does connect with what you say here. So very basically, I think a person is first and foremost defined in almost all of their traits and characteristics by biology and genetics. And that's the first. I saw someone who talked about the lottery. It's like a lottery. So, and it's not the fact. If you name it lottery, it might seem that there are big prizes and small prizes. It's not that, but it's just all very different. And one that I have been investigating a lot in the past was prenatal testosterone and the influence of that. So you have, and genetics. Genetics is there are two aspects to it. It's the DNA you have, and then you have the epigenetic effects of stuff that happens to you. And so prenatal testosterone, just to give an example, really has been investigated and does influence the formation of the brain in the womb. That's just like a chemical substance that surrounds you in the womb. It's partially made by the baby, partially by the mother, partially influenced by stress by the mother, etc., etc. And this heavily puts your brain development in a certain direction. So that's the first thing, genetics. Then the second thing is your very, very early experiences, your first 1 or 2 years of your life. And then we can talk about, for instance, attachment styles. I don't know if you've investigated with this. You have 4 attachment styles: secure attachment, anxious attachment, what's the other one called? Ambivalent. And I forgot I just talked about it today. And what was the other one?
Disorganized.
Excuse me?
Disorganized, avoidant, anxious, and secure.
Avoidant. That's the one I was looking for.
Yeah, I made a quick Google search.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And I think the way you interpret things and live things and handle things, and whether you are logical or not, and all these kind of things are already defined by this, and very variable at 2 years of age already. And then how should I say this? The place of intelligence in this is, for me, I would compare it with you could see yourself as a huge ocean full of all kinds of movements and traits and temperature differences and all that. And your intelligence, for me, is like a little ball in this ocean, which is probably very different than what intelligence thinks of itself. If you ask your intelligent part of yourself, hello, intelligence, how important are you, and how much do you define my acts and my life? And intelligence would respond, well, I'm probably 95% responsible of what's happening here. I see it almost completely the opposite. I have had this image in my mind that we're like a monkey, a big monkey that's just going about its day. And then in the mouth of the monkey, there's a lizard. And the lizard is the intelligent part, the conscious intelligent part, and it's just babbling. It's babbling about. And the monkey's going about, and the monkey feels this or that, is hungry, and the lizard in the mouth of the monkey says, yes, we definitely have to go to the right because at this moment we are hungry, and if we're hungry, to the right there's food. But that's not what the monkey's doing. The monkey is just going about its stuff, and the intelligent part is interpreting the whole thing. And I would like to make some publicity here for a book, not by me, but by, it's really must be the best book I've read in my life. It's called The Mind is Flat by Nick, I'm so bad in names. The Mind is Flat. I do a quick Google also. Nick Chater. If I would be able to have people read a book, it would be this one. It's truly a paradigm shift in how we perceive ourselves and the mind. And what happens is that there have been a lot of psychological experiments in the past, and there's a lot of stuff known, and we still do as if it doesn't happen, as if we don't know it. And the writer of The Mind is Flat would like to have science put into psychology at a deep level. And it's very, very uncomfortable, but it's also very, in a certain sense, liberating. And his basic tenet of The Mind is Flat is that there are no hidden depths in the mind. So we tend to think that the mind is a very deep and dark place where a lot of stuff is there, and you could dive into it and ask yourself and find out and then bring it to the surface, and it's what defines our actions and our thoughts and all that. He makes a very, very convincing point using real psychological experiments that are actually peer-reviewed, and some of them even decades old, that is not the case, and that there is a kind of interpreter part in your brain that on the fly interprets all kinds of stuff and makes up an interpretation of the moment, an explanation, stuff like that.
Split brain experiment, in which you see you get the corpus callosum.
Yeah.
You show an image to one side of the brain, to one eye, and then you ask the person starts moving, and then you ask him, "Where are you going?" And then they bend where they are going in the moment.
Yeah, exactly. But then there you see it very clearly happening. But there's also what they call the grand illusion. So if our field of vision, we only see color in a very small cone. Actually, all around, like if you would look in front of you and there's a wall 3 meters in front of you, you would probably see color in like a diameter of 1 meter or 1.5 meters. All the rest is actually gray and gradually more and more blurry. But we don't perceive this. You don't see the world like this. I am looking at my room, I see everything clearly and everything in color. And it's not what we really see. That's already something made up. Our brain made this up. And our brain makes this up because you can instantly fill in the gaps. And that's also, so he starts with that as a basic example. And then he goes into a lot of like the experiment you mentioned, where there's so much making up on the fly going on that we don't really consider. So, and this whole intelligent part for me is, how would I say it? It's not that I dismiss it as not important, but it's so much less important than what it thinks, and that's the problem. You think with your intelligence. You don't. How will I say this? Your actions are defined by a lot of things that are completely and totally unknowable and unknown to you. And they are unknowable also. And that's the other point that Nick Chater makes in his book, is that you have a lot of activity in your brain. And then all this activity, there is a part of it that comes into your consciousness, right? But that is also already an interpretation. There is no way you can see the black and white, the gray part of your field of vision. You cannot see it because you cannot go back to the source of your information. It does not come raw into your consciousness. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's the same with all the interpretations and a bit understandings. When you say it's about understanding and stuff like that, when you think about science also, it's always very unsure. A real scientific person should never say, I'm sure of this, because it doesn't exist. That would be the Bible, and that's not how it works. Yeah.
Yeah. All the knowledge is temporary.
So it's not really knowledge, it's our best guess. Knowledge implies like, I know it. Actually, it's our best guess at the moment. A working hypothesis. Even the most solid theories that we have are working hypotheses.
I think that what you were saying about the AI and how natural selection has built this in a way to cut corners everywhere. The phobia is just one. If you extend your arm and the top of your thumb, that's more or less the diameter from the perspective of your eyes, which you can see in a high resolution. The rest is progressively less and less high resolution, and we can see the way the brain encodes and interprets the information transmitted from the eyes to the brain, which the eyes are and then a part of the brain because it evolved out of the brain.
Yeah.
But anyway, what I was trying to say is that the input from the brain, from the eyes to the brain, is incredibly processed by the time it is conscious.
Yeah.
And you see that when you move the eye. When you move the eye 3 times per second on average, those are called saccades. And in the moment you move it, your whole
You're
universe,
blind.
everything,
Right.
exactly, you're blind and you don't see anything.
Yeah.
But you're not even aware of that blindness.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we also have two huge blind spots, the size of an egg in each eye because of the way the nerves are connected.
And it's filled up. Huh?
Exactly, and we don't see it. There are some hilarious images I've seen on the internet about a cross and a circle. And you focus in the cross and you don't see the circle. Or you focus in the circle and you don't see the cross. And I'm like, what the fuck? But you obviously have to be at the correct distance from the image. And you also have to cover one of your eyes, because if not, the other one corrects for the lack of the scene of the other one. But due to the way evolution found the solutions to problems we had to maximize our fitness, our bodies are not perfect. And you can see this, there's a clear example you can do. If you move your eye from the side and if you touch it, that movement cannot be corrected by the brain because it was not predicting the movement of the eye.
Yeah.
And the way you see the world when your eye is moving, not intentionally, is the way you should be seeing the world if the brain was not discounting the deliberate movement of the eye.
You will enjoy so much this book if you read it. The Mind is Flat. You should really read it, because that's only the beginning, and that's just the top of the iceberg. What we're mentioning here, because the next thing that he goes into, for instance, is that they have tried for reasons of artificial intelligence explorations. A first approach in artificial intelligence was to extract from people their theories about the world. We extract the theories, we encode them, and then we let computers make decisions based on this. It was a complete failure. And why was it a complete failure? Because people have no consistent theories about anything. About anything. So if you, for instance, people would say, I have a kind of understanding that I could explain about gravity and how things fall to the ground and how they react. So imagine you take a bit of salt, you take small rubber balls, you take small metal balls, and you take ground coffee. Yeah, it's all particles. And then you throw them to the ground. The salt will kind of fall and scatter and be kind of flat. Yeah, the rubber balls will bounce. The metal balls will bounce and go around, and the ground coffee will kind of like fall down and stay where it is. Now, if I ask you to explain why all of these do this, it would become, and it's just an example, it would become really difficult, because you would say, yeah, well, the rubber balls, they bounce because it's rubber. It has elasticity, but a metal ball is not elastic. So why does the metal ball bounce and the rubber ball bounce? It's already difficult. So you could say, yeah, well, most things bounce, but the ground coffee doesn't bounce. It just falls flat and it stays there. So why is this? Yeah, maybe it's because what? Because it's sticky, and the salt it extends. It's like grain, but the ground coffee doesn't extend. And they have tried. I don't know if it's a good example. I think he gives better examples in his book, but they have tried to extract models, theoretical models about very basic things from people, and they just couldn't. This is why they abandoned this way of using artificial intelligence, and now they're into the neural models and the black box models, where you just let code do its own thing and come to a conclusion.
How about this as a model? I've been thinking of a solution to this problem. How about the rate at which energy is dissipated as a good measure, as a good explanation of why the rubber ball bounces, the one of metal also, and the liquid instantly dissipates its kinetic energy into heat with friction with its environment? How about the rate at which the energy is dissipated as a good explanation of why one bounces and the other one not?
Yeah, maybe. I think if we come to an easy solution for this one here, I think then I didn't give the good example, because there are a lot of examples where it doesn't work. It's not. It simply doesn't. And it's actually Nick Chater has been very involved in artificial intelligence in his life. And so he witnessed this this movement from trying to extract models to kind of organic artificial intelligence. By the way, talking about artificial intelligence, it struck me that your definition of intelligence is exactly what artificial intelligence does: pattern recognition and prediction. And that's also something that Nick Chater then discusses, but we're not discussing Nick Chater's book, right?
No, we're discussing the universe, and if Nick Chater talked about something interesting, we are now discussing about him.
Yeah. Well, his take on intelligence is also very interesting, because you have this kind of pattern prediction intelligence, and artificial intelligence will take this over and be better than us in this. No doubt about it. But that doesn't mean that the robotic overlords will be taking over the universe or the planet soon, because he talks about how the human mind actually works in a completely different way. And one of the things that characterizes for him the human mind is metaphors. And if you think of it, you could say that most scientific understanding is reframing one experience or event or process in terms of another one, if you would think about it like this.
There's regularities that can be compressed and expressed in a way that doesn't require you to replicate the thing that you are talking about. You can compress 1 square centimeter of pure iron into that expression instead of just saying the location and motion of every single atom. If the cube is perfect, the expression of the compression is good enough.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, and then you will take over. It will travel from economics to physics to stuff like that. It's like metaphors, one in the other. And if you say, it's also an interesting thing about understanding. I don't know if you have crossed Feynman's thoughts on understanding, the Nobel Prize physicist Feynman.
Richard Feynman.
Yeah. Because I found it very interesting. He says, if you just rephrase something in other vocabulary, you haven't understood anything. So if you say, gravity is the fact that things fall to the earth, to make a very simplified version, and why do things fall to the earth? Because there's gravity. You haven't understood anything.
A circular argument.
Yeah, you have just changed vocabulary. But it's mostly what you see in a book about physics, a more basic book about physics that they will teach in secondary school. They will say gravity is the fact that stuff falls to the earth. And why do stuff fall to the earth? Well, because there's gravity.
Let me push back.
Topic.
Let me push back on that. I think that Feynman was right, but only locally. He was wrong absolutely, in the absolute. It is true that if you have a circular argument, that's a fallacy. You cannot use gravity is the thing falling and the thing falls because of gravity. That's a horrible argument. But ultimately, the laws of physics or the universe is in one way and not in another. So every explanation you can give has to ultimately make reference to another field or another part of the universe. And
exactly.
Ultimately, there's an overarching circle which makes all the arguments be part of the everything. So everything ultimately is a circular argument.
Yeah, well, that's a bit a metaphor thing also. You just at the end just rephrase one thing in a metaphor of another. And there's then also the very basic thing that we really don't know what reality is. Reality doesn't even mean anything, the word. There is only perception. There's only that. So, and there's very basic ways of thinking about that. Of all the frequencies that there are, we just perceive a few of them. You know, and all this kind of stuff, of all the colors there are, colors are frequencies, we just perceive a few. Animals see the world in a very different way. They perceive in a very different way. Their reality is completely different. You could imagine a kind of alien, whatever, in pop culture, and that would live here, and it may not be even sensible to mass like we are, the kind of energy that we feel like mass, and it can be here and we wouldn't even know it, because it lives in different energy levels. You know, we don't know really anything, because there's this famous argument, which is a very strong one in the end. You could be a brain in a jar, and scientists would be in the future, and scientists would be probing your brain and probing this brain and causing it to feel like it's a body having a podcast now. You wouldn't know.
But don't you realize that we are already brains in bats?
Brains in bats?
In bats, in a jar.
Yeah.
We are already brains in jars. Inside of our brains, everything is dark and humid. But we are able to touch things. So there's a conversion.
Well, we think we touch things. I don't know if I touch anything.
Yeah, but the perception of the touching exists, and that's the fact. So
but maybe if you would be here, that you wouldn't, and I touch the table, you wouldn't feel a table. Maybe, I don't know. In practical experience we do, but maybe we invent the people around us.
No, but that misses my point. I was saying that there's a conversion of our environment to a subjective experience inside of our brains, which is disconnected. There's a translation, and that translation is analogous to a matrix. We are in a matrix because we convert our environment, the stimuli, the information around us, into neural firings, which can be interpreted by our brains. So we are already brains in bats.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, you're right. But then what's also the fact is that we only touch an infinitely small part of what really is around us, because we make, it's interesting, we make instruments that react to things that we don't perceive, but then again we perceive the movement of the instrument.
Yeah.
Does the instrument really perceive something, or does it not? Or why? we say it's because there's a high frequency of something, but that's because the instrument says so. It's really so. In the end, it sometimes, I feel like we have such a small bit of insecure experience that is then even interpreted in many ways that we don't even know how. What can we talk about? It becomes really weird in the end. And then I become really pragmatic. And then I go like into feelings and stuff like that. Then we come back to the beginning of the podcast a bit, like happiness and, you just feel what you feel. And that's the best you can do with it.
Have you read the book The Case Against Reality by Donald Hoffman?
No.
He's a physicist, and he talked in his basic thesis in the book is that natural selection built us in a way to maximize fitness and not the correct not the correct interpretation of reality. And if there's a trade-off between correctly representing the universe and fitness, natural selection will have selected fitness all of the time. And so there's a incredible hiding of truth from us. We use tools or icons in our interface which do not literally represent what we are talking about, what we are feeling, but it is a metaphor for something that is actually there. The bean in your desktop doesn't represent a literal bean, but if the literal thing was represented in your desktop, it would be useless. Because you only need an icon to be able to understand the concept. The relevant information is already signaled to you with the image of a pin. You don't need anything else. I think you would really enjoy this book.
Okay. Yeah. Interesting. Sounds interesting.
The comment you made about artificial intelligence, the definition of intelligence that I gave wasn't for free. It has a lot of research behind it, and it's not mine. I think I read it from Jeff Hawkins. I got it from Jeff Hawkins. He's the author of a book called On Intelligence, in which he shares his theory about what intelligence is. Do you think that intelligence can be measured by the leverage of your actions?
What do you mean exactly by leverage?
Exactly, that's precisely what I wanted you to ask me. Leverage would be automatizing the things that are not creative. If you are, let's say, if you're cooking food every day and the process is systematic, if there are some patterns that are systematic, those can be automated away. And instead of devoting your time to thinking about the cooking, because you will eventually need the proteins, the vitamins, the carbohydrates, all the physical variables that you care about in your body, the information about the need for those things, you already had it 100 years ago. So why is it that we are having to preoccupy ourselves with something to which a solution was already found thousands of years ago?
Yeah. Wow, that's really interesting. I never thought about it this way, but it's really interesting because in my day job, I'm in process engineering and stuff like that, and I would definitely say that in my very personal and even a bit emotional experience, I would definitely say yes. I find it frustrating and just to plainly name it as it is, I find it frustrating and dumb to daily again do all the same stuff that you could automate. Yeah, that's completely my daily experience and feeling. Now, if it's a good definition or anything, I don't know. If it's acceptable, I don't know. But yeah, it might be a good for someone like me. It might be a good short measure that would like the other one, like pattern prediction. that would predict intelligence in its broader sense, because I can't imagine someone who would capture the possibility of leverage of actions that I would think he would be dumb in any other aspect of their life.
Yeah,
This
is maybe one other aspect of our lives in which there's an overlap between you and I. When I'm talking with someone, or I'm just in a group and there are some other people are talking about something which is specifically parochial or not transcendent, not transcending anything. And they are discussing the play of football of the previous day, and they're complaining about how the referee was bought by the other team or whatever. I don't know. And in that moment, I feel frustrated because no matter what they say, no further knowledge can be achieved.
And it won't travel, right? That's something about knowledge. You have knowledge that travels and knowledge that doesn't travel. By travel, I mean it travels over to other instances of events, to other places, to other situations. It travels, and it becomes so much more powerful. It's like a very powerful thought because it can be useful in so many situations. Yeah,
exactly.
We talked a lot about understanding things and things you can do or should not do and stuff like that. But there is something very special going on with trauma, and it changes the whole game in a way that the thing with trauma. But maybe I should start with what do I mean by trauma. So you have trauma. Literally, it's a wound, right? Trauma, it's a wound. And here we are talking about emotional or mental wounds. And so there's a kind of trauma that is at one point in time, like for instance, your house gets you get a burglar in your house, or you get run over by a car or something. And apart from the maybe physical trauma, you have a kind of emotional, psychological trauma. But that's one point. So you can just go with that to a therapist, or maybe you can eventually get over it yourself, integrate it in your mind. And that's one kind of trauma. But the trauma that I'm now interested in is what is called complex post-traumatic stress disorder. It may go by other names also, but it's a kind of trauma that is coming from a long period of possibly low-level problems that you cannot integrate, especially as a child. And why I want to talk about this in the framework of like happiness and maybe mediocrity and stuff like that is because it completely skews your vision of reality, in a sense that several things can happen. So to start with, there's since maybe a decade or a few decades, they have found out that the brain actually works like in parts, that there are like neural nets that form a kind of part of your brain, and that these parts can operate like in parallel or distinctly one from the other. And so as you develop as a child and you don't have an ideal surroundings, emotionally especially, you will develop several strategies in several situations, and this works like muscle memory. So you know muscle memory, where you learn to play the piano or something, and it's just in your muscle. Of course, it's not in your muscle; it's in your brain. But it's not something that you rationalize, you think about. You're not saying, "Oh, I'm going to move my finger to the left and hit that key on the piano." It's a kind of implicit memory. it's called. And most of the social stuff you learn works like muscle memory, in the sense that if you are in a social situation and somebody makes a face, has an expression, people have expressions all the time. You can't just sit down, like take a picture, sit down, analyze the expression, and then say, okay, how am I going to respond in this situation? No, you use a kind of muscle memory. Bam, you use it like that and you go on. And then the other person does something similar. And most of these social interactions, be they in like among colleagues or with your partner or very intimate or very loose, all of those actually they happen based on this implicit memory. So the thing with this is, if you're going to analyze how you should or not behave and try to understand and stuff like that, you're working in a level of existence, which is very interesting and important. But there's this whole level of implicit workings that you don't have access to in neither direction. You don't have access to understanding it because there is no understanding, it's implicit. It's like you don't understand either how you play the piano, you just play it. And there's no understanding of what's going on in reality different from how you process it implicitly. You see what I mean? There's like no godlike divine creature that can come down and say, no, you interpreted this wrongly. It's not like this. It's just your implicit memory clicks in and you analyze, you evaluate, you act. And arguably, I don't know what percent of your actions and interactions are in this way, but it's probably like 90 and some percent. And those define greatly your life. And then if you go back to trauma, in my case, I lived in in one of my books, I called it an orphanage, a good quality orphanage. So I was raised in a normal family, 2 parents, 3 kids. But thinking back on it, it feels like a good quality orphanage. And in the good quality orphanage, you have clothes and food and all of that, and it looks nice from the outside. But what is missing is the whole emotional part in how I see an orphanage. You know, it's like an institution where they help you to survive, but the whole emotional part is missing. And so we get into this implicit memory stuff, and there's a very crucial, a very interesting concept of body memory and emotional memory. And that's where I want to get to now. So body memory and emotional memory, what do they mean by this? You have lived through stuff in your childhood and you reacted to it, and you had how should I say, you constructed certain patterns and strategies in your brain. You lived through things and you built up this implicit memory. You know, it was created in your brain. And what will happen is that when you're an adult and later on in your life, things will happen that will bring back that memory. But what they mean by body memory and emotional memory is that it doesn't come with a conscious memory content. So you cannot recognize it as a memory, you know? So it's not like if someone says something and then you think, oh, this reminds me of, I don't know what, from your past. So, and that happened then, and then so I could yes or not react to this. What happens is that it comes back as actually the memory comes back and overlays reality. It overlays reality, and then you are simply convinced that reality is what your memory is. So actually it's like quite literally being teleported to the past. And then you react as if the past was the present. And there are some estimates about how many people could have like something like CPTSD or trauma or insecure attachment is quite overlapping with this. So for insecure attachment, the figures are about 40-50% of people would have an insecure attachment. With CPTSD, it can be something similar. So we're talking about half of humanity that is quite often teleported to the past and then acts as if the past is the present. So I'll give an example from my own personal life quite recently. So I was upset. I was in the kitchen and I was upset, and there's my son and my wife. They're there too. And they go out. My son goes to his room, my wife goes to the living room, and they go and do their stuff. And I immediately recognized this, or was convinced that it was a silent treatment. I don't know if you have heard of silent treatment.
Meditation.
No. Silent treatment is a kind of punishment. So it's a kind of in toxic education, it's a punishment.
That's an ineffective treatment to someone who knows how to meditate.
Yeah, but when you're 6, you probably don't know how to meditate. So the silent treatment consists of you do something that your parents don't like, and they act as if you don't exist, and they make it very clear on what conditions you exist again. So you are allowed to exist, and quite literally to survive, because you cannot survive without your parents. You can't just say, well, fuck it all, I go live somewhere else and I live my own life, go to hell. You can't. So you are obliged, you are really forced to do some quite damaging stuff inside in order to exist again, to be able to survive. And so silent treatment is like, we do as if you don't exist. You're exiled, So you run around there, and you may say, you may ask something to your mom. Hey, mom, this or that. She does like if she didn't hear. You go to your dad. Your dad plays the same thing because he's in this thing with your mom, and dad doesn't hear you either. So you're really terrified, And then at the moment when you do whatever condition they put up there, so you can exist again, then you exist. And then you say, okay, well, now that you fulfill my conditions, my own conditions, now you exist. So that's a silent treatment. And I had a lot of silent treatment in my childhood. So I don't want to make this a personal thing about me, but it's an example, a real example, and it works this way. So in my adult life, 30 years later, 40 years later now, I'm in the kitchen and I'm upset, and my wife goes somewhere, my son goes somewhere, and I live a silent treatment. So I'm even more upset, and I go to them and I say, this is a silent treatment. I'm not accepting this. And like they're like, what's going on? I have no problem. I'm just looking at this, and if you want, we can talk or whatever, Well, actually, it was worse. I said, this is silent treatment. I don't accept it, and I went out. So it's to like regulate myself. I went out, and I was out for like an hour or something, and then I came back, and then I said, what's this with this silent treatment? I said, but it's not silent treatment. There is no silent treatment here, which is true, But the thing is, this didn't come back to me with a memory of my parents or something doing me silent treatment, So the actual result of this all is that from time to time, and this can be 99% of your time or 1%, and according to the moment, it can vary. It's like you're in a kind of 3D setting that's not exactly what's really happening. So, and I was, since I'm concerned with all this in my life, and I have my own problems with this in my life. I was thinking about all the things we said in the previous talk, which are interesting and true and meaningful, but there's this whole layer, a really thick layer of existence that is not touched by this. And this goes for traumatized people, but also for non-traumatized people, because so many of your actions and even thoughts and even, I think, understandings actually are fueled by all these patterns. You see? So we mailed a bit, and that was a bit the gist of what I was trying to say in the mail. Also, because I for quite some time I was, and not in a professional way, but like in a personal way, interested in philosophy and stuff like that. I read a lot of those things, and I have to say now it didn't help me anything. Zero. It actually just sidetracked me, because the real problem was not attainable through all this reasoning and trying to understand. I'm not at all against trying to understand, by the way. It's something that any brain does all the time, but that was my thought. Like, I'd like to discuss this part of existence. So I talked a lot already. So
I think you're confounding quantitative and qualitative stuff. You're thinking that what went wrong with you was the amount of understanding, and I think it was the quality of the understanding. You were understanding wrong things, or you were not reasoning in a right manner. I think that there's only one way out of any problem, and this can be applied even to civilization. It's not physical stuff surrounding us that limits our flourishing. It's our ideas and our ability to modify them based on our knowledge of how to deal with stuff. And if you have the right ideas, those are the only way of solving anything. Without the right ideas, you can be given everything we can now conceive of, and you wouldn't be able to survive. But with the right ideas, you can be given almost nothing, and out of that you would build the most flourishing civilization in the history of humanity. And you mentioned before that there was muscle memory, and there's a lot of backing. There's a lot of backing of this concept in neuroscience, in that as you learn, maybe we talked about this in the previous occasion, and as to give a bit of context to the audience, we had a conversation like 4 weeks ago, and now this is the second part of the conversation. And if we seem to not be very fresh in respect to what we had talked, it's because there's a 1 month difference between the two instances, even if in the audio it seems like it's instantaneous. And what I was saying is that in the neuroscience, the study pertaining to the brain has discovered a lot of overlap with what you were saying about muscle memory. The process of learning to do something, the process of recognizing the patterns and knowing what you should do, what you should do in case of something happening. Let's say you want to open a jar, you know that there's some rotation that has to occur in your hand, and the first instance in which you expose yourself to that, the regions of the brain activated are more of the frontal lobes and the ones in the top of the brain, the exterior part of the brain. And as you learn it, the regions of the brain that progressively migrate towards the back and the bottom. So from the top and the front to the back and the bottom. It's a transition. And the more it goes to that back and bottom region of the brain, the more automatic the behavior is. And you can even see this with the nature of the different regions, the prefrontal cortex versus the thalamus, or I don't know. There's one of the prefrontal cortex is the most cognitively demanding and the most rational, or the most late in the evolution, and the thalamus is quite old and has, I think, more than 1 billion years, and it's in charge of coordinating movement, which is a much more basic thing. And as the frontal lobes, which are the ones that are more able to reason about new input without context, as the context is built and the prefrontal cortex has been able to make sense of what's going on around you, those patterns are sent back so that you don't have to use those neurons to compute new input, so you can learn new things. This is my interpretation of what I've been able to research until now. So it's a very useful process by which the part of the brain which is most capable of dealing with new stuff is constantly dealing with new stuff, because the parts which are more brute or automatized take over behavior when that behavior has been learned sufficiently. Like driving. I used to, when I started driving, it was something that required a high percentage of my cognitive capacity. I couldn't even hold a conversation with someone next to me because I had to be 100% doing what I was doing. And even doing that, I wasn't able to perform very well. And now it's been a long time since I learned to drive, and I'm able to do that quite seamlessly. And I'm sure that if you do a fMRI to my brain before and after this time of practicing and driving, you would see a noticeable difference of the regions activated when I'm doing the driving. But maybe now I'm listening to a podcast, so a similar region is being activated because I'm also learning something. So I don't know if the information should be gathered without listening to a podcast. But anyway, where I was going with this is that this is deeply connected with trauma and what you were mentioning. Because I think that the best definition, or the definition I think is the best of trauma, is not being able to make sense of stimuli in your environment, not being able to give it context, because the map of your world doesn't match the expectation you had. So you were expecting something, and something sufficiently different to what you were expecting occurs, and that's an inability to make sense of what's going on. I don't know what's going on, and the magnitude of uncertainty of what's going on is trauma. And 9/11 was the best example of this, because we didn't know the tower fell. 2 towers fell, sure. 3, but anyway. But we didn't know what fell. It was physically, the buildings, but maybe it was something deeper. Maybe it was something more like the West, the civilization which prospered the most in history was falling because we haven't been able to stop 2 hijacks in airplanes. We didn't know at that moment how far the unexpected stimuli we were being exposed to put to doubt the structure of our society. And this is analogous to if something very bad happens to you, if your girlfriend leaves you, or if you break your arm doing something very normal. There's some negative feedback given to you, and you were using a model of the world which has been proven to not be good enough because you're now getting some negative feedback. And why would I be getting some negative feedback if I was using a good model of the world? So your model has to be updated, and the necessity to update your model is perceived by you as work to be done in the future. And the amount of work that has to be done in the future, the updating to positively, the increase in the expectation of work to be done in the future, that is pain. Pain, the definition of pain psychologically, I think, the way to operationalize this psychological concept of pain is the increase in the expectation of work to be done in the future. If you thought that you were finishing a work and suddenly you realize that everything was wrong and you have to start again, you feel pain psychologically. It's emotionally the same thing as if you were punched, because they're not exactly the same thing, but you get my point that it's painful to have to perceive that your effort was wasted and now you have to do more. So the updating of the map, the expectation of how much more you have to change your map of the world is, I think, part of what defines trauma and pain. And I think that here I would like to put into doubt trauma and a lot of the talk that is going on in the current psychiatric mainstream, in that I think that most of the afflictions that people think they have, or the afflictions that they have, are created through the process of believing that you have the affliction. The mind is an incredibly powerful tool, and if you believe that you have a problem, the problem increases or even starts existing. So by the process of believing that you have something or that you don't have something, the thing itself exists or stops existing. It's like a placebo effect applied with steroids to your own mind and your mental well-being. And that should be discounted. And I wanted to unite this idea of the self-inflicting damage that people make to their own minds by believing that they have a problem that maybe they wouldn't have if they didn't believe that, with trauma, and how we now perceive a lot of things to be traumatic, while in 2,000 years ago, or maybe 40,000 years ago would be a better example, there were a lot of things that we didn't consider to be traumatic. For example, right now, if a 16-year-old girl has intercourse with a 50-year-old man, we consider that to be disgusting and even traumatic to both to the girl and maybe to some other people who have been able to conceive of this brutality. But that was something very normal 40,000 years ago. And the thing that has made the difference in terms of trauma is not the fundamental thing going on, but the interpretation and the context. Well, the context affects the interpretation. And so it is your interpretation of the fact which makes the trauma or not. And I'm sure if you take this spectrum, I don't think the spectrum ends in the maybe forceful having of sex of a 16-year-old girl. It goes much farther in terms of brutality. You can take that to the most brutal thing possible. And I'm sure that we could conceive of the most brutal thing to be the most normal thing if we had the right context. And as long as trauma is not adaptive and it's hindering you in your ability to further your objectives and flourish as a human being, you should reduce the magnitude of novelty that you are perceiving in your environment. So let's say you get super traumatized by something. In that moment, there's a big argument to be made that you should reframe the way you see the situation and say, okay, trauma is relative. If I was living 40,000 years ago, this brutal thing that I just saw, I wouldn't give a fuck about it. So why do I now? Because I think that this is very, very out of the ordinary, and I'm being very surprised by this. But actually, it's not about the fact which traumatizes me. It's my interpretation of the fact. And this has a lot of overlap with Stoicism, Buddhism, and a lot of the great wise philosophies in history, in that it is the interpretation of the fact which creates your mental state, not the actual fact, in a big way. For example, if you get, or if you take it far enough, pain has to occur, but I'm sure that the margin of power that we are harnessing in our minds is so small, and people are being told that the world is horrible and that there's so many things that are going on that are bad, and that only coddles them into expecting everything to go perfect, or I will have psychological dysregulation. And it only reduces the margin of occurrences that could lead to you being in a good state. I think that we should increase that. And the process of increasing what you consider to be acceptable, or the increasing of the range of possibilities that would lead to you being staying as a functional human being, requires negative immediate feedback, because it's hard. This is maybe analogous to what happens when you get negative feedback in any sense. Let's say someone tells you that you're not fit, and that's uncomfortable because you want to be fit and you want to perceive that you're fit. But if you're really not fit and someone tells you that you're not fit, the amount of time you're going to suffer is limited if you confront the negative feedback immediately. But if you do not, and you hide from that, and you go into absurd ideas like there's no objective fitness, everybody is acceptable, there's no difference between morbid obesity and just someone who trains a lot and eats healthily, there's no difference between those things. If you believe that, the amount of pain you're going to endure in your life in the long term is much bigger. So we are now talking about one thing or the other. We're talking of having immediate negative feedback, which is less, or prolonged long-term negative feedback, which is the world and the universe, which is going to cause you to have a shorter, more brutish, and more painful and disgusting life for not being willing to confront the reality. And so I think that I was wanting to connect the idea I mentioned before about increasing the range of what we consider to be acceptable and would enable us to be functional human beings with the idea of getting negative feedback in any format or any instance from anyone and being able to deal with that face to face like a scientist. I want to see the data and I want to see whether this data points towards my hypothesis being correct or not. I had a hypothesis before, which was that I am fit. And now I'm being told the opposite. Let's test this data. Let's try to recognize the right pattern, because maybe mine, the one I was applying before, that I was fit, is wrong, and maybe the other one, which I'm not fit, might be the right one. So let's try to apply a rational way of interpreting the data, and that's the way forward. And a lot of the psychiatric industry is based in a parasitic ability that they have of putting themselves in a position of authority and talking down to ignorant people about psychology, that you have a problem because you have a feeling, which we have in this incredible book of 1,000 pages, and in the page 712 we have this specific feeling that you're having, and the solution to this horrible feeling that you're having is this super expensive therapy, which is addictive and very lucrative to us. So please start having this therapy, and this is the solution to your feeling, because this feeling in specific is very bad. All the other ones are also very bad, and every feeling that you have has a solution in our handbook, and the solution will always be paying me a lot of money. Okay, so I think there's a lot of misalignment of interest between the psychiatrist industry and the consumers, in that there's a asymmetry in knowledge, and if it's hard to make a man understand something if his salary depends on his not understanding it. So how are you going to tell to a psychiatrist to stop his bullshit when he himself believes it? It's not as if anyone is acting deliberately in a evil manner. I don't think anyone is evil in the sense of I know that I'm doing bad to people and I still do it. I think that everyone who enacts this superfluous treatment to people that could be solved through the letting people know that more things should be acceptable, or you should be able to deal with more things than you have until now. That stoic ethos would be the solution to 99.9% of the psychological problems, I assure you.
Mm-hmm. I had I had quite some ideas while you were talking. A small one just for the end, when you talk about evil. Evil is a moral concept, right? Good and evil is a moral concept. So there's no science behind it. You can discuss.
That's completely wrong. I think science has a lot to say about morality.
Well, yes, science can say a lot about morality, but there's no scientific way of proving that something is evil or something is good. And by the way, what we consider evil, someone else will consider good, and vice versa. Like in maybe some radical Muslims consider it very good to beat their wife daily. I don't know. For them it's morally superior. It's goodness. It's the way things should be. I think it's not good. It's very relative. So there's no absolute way of telling. The way I have it in my head is I wouldn't know about evil or good. I may have my personal reactions in that way, but there's nothing I can say about it
I do have some
other
things
people
to say.
that makes sense. I don't feel that I can say a lot about that makes sense to other people, but there is a scientific concept, which is sadism. Sadism is where instead of having pleasure related to someone else's pleasure, you experience pleasure related to someone else's pain. It's actually a cross-wiring in the brain. Instead of being wired like normally, like directly, pleasure to pleasure, it's pleasure to pain. And those people are between brackets evil. It's in my head. I make it into sadistic. So if you're not sadistic, then we can have a lot of interactions that may be hurtful, because maybe you do something that I don't like and you don't know it, and all those kinds of stuff. But there will be nothing similar to evil happening. But if you are sadistic, then something will be happening that probably most people would call evil, because you will experience pleasure from my pain.
I think you shouldn't frame sadism as a black or white thing. Either you have it or not, because I think that we are all in some way sadistic. The natural selection built us in a way, all of us. The differences between races are negligible in terms of almost everything. And what I'm trying to say with this is that we are all there's a lot of overlap between every human being, and the nature of sadism, of being able to derive pleasure from the perception of suffering in another person, is ingrained into our nature. Because there were a lot of instances in which making other people suffer or seeing other people suffer was a cue to maximizing your fitness, defined biologically as the ability to survive and reproduce. And I think that you cannot. There's a lot of people who have that trait in a bigger proportion than others, but you cannot say someone is and someone is not. The point in which you put the border is completely arbitrary, and I don't see a way of doing a rigorous establishment of, okay, it's when you are on top of the 2% of the population, you are sadistic. If you are in the second percentile, you are sadistic. No, that's complete bullshit. What about another population who have other kinds of distributions or marginal?
Well, I think you're right. So in the sense that I would reframe it then and say sadism is in my head more or less equal to evil, and then at this moment, at one certain moment, someone can do something sadistic, and then after that again not. While the sadistic thing is happening, it will for me be like evil. While the not sadistic thing is happening, it will not be like evil.
So what you're saying right now is the pattern that was recognized by natural selection that gave us fitness, that made us able to exist, is in some way wrong and should be eliminated because it leads to more bad being in the world. If people enjoy more making other people suffer, there will be more bad being in the world. But you should be able to understand why that trait is in us. It's not for free that we are sadistic. It has a deep biological origin. So in order to be able to say that it is bad, you should be able to understand first why it exists and all the mechanisms with which it gave positive fitness to people who have that trait in relationship to not having it. And then you should be able to say how our fitness right now would be maximized through the not having of that trait. And one trait that I could do this with would be our taste for sugar. We like sugar too much. It is maladapted to our current environment. And if you're able to do the same argument with sadism, which I think it's quite reasonable, that's a rigorous way of saying this is a maladaptive pattern that has been recognized in a different time frame, and now we should use another one.
Yeah, it's something like that, because actually I could even simplify it more for me. I'd say it's simply I don't like it. I don't like the other person's sadism. I don't like it. And we're living in groups together, and it's more adaptive that we do things that we like mutually, because it's an atmosphere where we obtain more. Everyone obtains more. So I suppose that the non-sadistic behavior is more adaptive in our society. It might be that if tomorrow it becomes a Mad Max situation, that it's more adaptive to be sadistic, and you get the petrol and the car and kill as many people as possible. Something like that. Yeah. There was also about trauma, the definition of trauma. So I'm just very interested in the topic. I'm not like an expert myself, but what's usually made there is a distinction between trauma and hurt. So we are all regularly hurt. And hurt is not the same as trauma. So, and the difference would be somewhere that trauma is hurt that you cannot integrate in your mind in a healthy way. It becomes all, define healthy, but to give an example, a very regular example, children that are abused in some way by their parents, they will, because you talked also about making sense of things, they will make sense of stuff anyway. It's not as if you can go on and not make sense of something. No, I don't think anybody can do that. Brains make sense. It's like they produce sense. So what will this child do? The child will make sense of the situation by saying, I am not lovable. My parents are all the time angry with me and they beat me, and I can't do anything good, whether I stand or sit or sleep or talk or not. Everything is bad. And the sense of this is that I am innately and completely unlovable and bad. And so there is a sense, and that's the whole problem of the thing. There is sense and there is inner consistency. So the whole problem becomes, where does the trigger come from to tell you that there may be a completely other logic that does also make sense, and why would one logic be better than the other? So you have two logics there. One logic is the child that says, my parents are like perfect. It's how it's in your child's brain. My parents are okay, but something is going on between us, so I am not lovable. It's one consistent logic, and everything can build around it, and then it ends up that you are ashamed all the time. You have to hide yourself. You will not. You will be an underachiever. You will, and it's all consistent. Everything clicks together in one way, and then you have the other logic where there's nothing. It's not that I am not lovable. I'm not perfect either, but I'm not lovable. They are wounded. My parents are wounded. So if I get angry, they have their own traumatic response to anger, and they just beat me. So I stop being angry. I stop expressing anger, and they are more comfortable with me crying alone in my room than, or even maybe I can't even do that and have to be silent and smiling, and then they're okay. That's another logic, and that's for me the whole conundrum in this whole situation. What is finally the trigger that one logic that is in itself consistent? What is the trigger that you should go to another logic? It's the same with conspiracy theories. Exactly the same. It is in itself logic, but with conspiracy theories, it's more clearly open, because they a lot of times have factual mistakes that you can really verify, like the flat earth theory. You can actually verify in many ways that the earth is not flat. The ancient Greeks verified it already with shadows and stuff, and so you can verify it. So there it's quite clear. But in the emotional, psychological, social sphere, there is no real verification.
There is.
Well, I don't know. Yes, I know. What do you think it is? The
This is
verification.
something that humans have been talking about for thousands of years. This is at all not anything new. The Buddha already said, I don't know how many thousands of years ago, that the proper response to anger is not anger, it's love. It's some kind of rationality. The only proper response to irrationality is rationality. The response to nothing, the proper response to nothing is irrationality. So
at no point in the history of humanity a proper response was to be angry at something. If you have to punch someone, you can punch them without the anger, but the anger derails you in terms of rationality, and you understand the evolutionary mechanism leading to anger. It puts you in a more automatized behavior because it takes control over your prefrontal cortex, and the limbic system takes more control of what's going on because you're flooded with emotions. But that's not the proper way of handling a human being. I think
but it's what happens.
It is what happens, absolutely. But what I'm saying is that the alternative is better because it leads to a more flourishing civilization. And in case someone treats you bad, which would be self-consistent with you being bad, because why would you be treated bad if you are not yourself bad? That's the argument that the child detects, which is self-consistent. The reason why they treat me bad is because I am bad, and people who are bad are treated badly, which is in itself wrong, because even if someone is bad and has all the bad features you can conceive of to the maximum degree, the only rational way to do would be to give them some compassion and tell them, excuse me, I see that you are a mess, your life is a complete mess, but here you have some help, some food, maybe some clothes, so you can start a new life, and I will help you out if you feel like I can provide you with anything useful. That would be the proper way of doing it, not with shaming them and telling them that they are completely useless. And this overlaps with the fat people, which I think that shaming them wouldn't be the right way. That's one way of giving them negative feedback, because there's something that has to be repaired. But an alternative way of solving the problem would be with affection and trying to tell them, excuse me, I see that this is the situation. Maybe I think that an alternative situation would be better, in which you are thinner and fitter. How about transitioning to that? I can help you if you want. I have a gym, I have some healthy food, and I can be your friend if you want, so that you don't have to hang out with other negative people who incentivize you to eat more sugar and unhealthy things. So I think that the way of solving a problem, I think there's two main ways of solving a problem: either with aggression, with anger, and with irrationality, with an instinctive response to something, which would be taking power over the situation. It's not using rationality. It's using your muscles to make the other person be obedient against their will. And that kind of forceful non-argument, which is there's no convincing me of otherwise. It's just I'm stronger than you, and I'm telling you to give me the money. So you give me the money because your alternative is to die. So I give you two possibilities. You either give me the money or you die right now because I can kill you. So it's analogous. It's just violence versus dialogue. It's only two options. We either have a dialogue or we fight. And the way of approaching the situation by the parents, by authority, which is the thing that the scientific method tries to debunk, if you're able to elaborate an argument which is convincing, that argument should be listened to and put to doubt the alternatives if it is consistent. And that's something that wasn't being done by the parents. The parents weren't using a scientific mindset to approach the situation. They were just using power to take control over the situation and shouting at the kid and saying, shut up, and don't cry. I don't want to deal with your problems. Just do the thing I want you to do. And I don't give a fuck of what your situation internally is, which is the wrong way of approaching it. And it is analogous to being robbed by someone just for the fact of having the physical power over the situation. And the alternative and a more adaptive way of handling it would be loving parents who just say, hey, I see that you are crying. Maybe have I done something previously which maybe you didn't like, or can I do something to help you and show to you that the way I behaved previously was irrational and that I should have treated you in another way, because what you have done until now is not sufficiently is not sufficient to determine your value as a person. And I think that the more you believe that you are valuable, the more valuable you will actually end up becoming. And that's why we want no one to believe that they are worthless, because it's the perception of being worthless that generates the worthless outcomes. And this point proves my previous point of the self-perpetuating and self-fulfilling prophecy nature of a lot of our thoughts. Because of believing something, that thing is created. And it connects perfectly with what you were saying of the self-consistent theory and the conspiracy theories, which are self-consistent. And I would say that the biggest conspiracy possible is Marxism. It's self-consistent, given that the capitalists exploit the workers because their contribution to the production process is not valuable at all. It makes sense that the workers should take power over the capitalists violently and just expropriate their property, and the government should manage everything. And this is a very self-consistent theory, but the root of it is rotten, and it doesn't work. It's just wrong from the root. So from a rotten root, you can build an edifice, a huge edifice of self-consistent hypotheses, which is great until you debunk the root, and then you see how the whole edifice, analogous to 9/11, falls, and it doesn't make sense. It's just completely wrong.
Have you heard about the concept of flip the lid? Flip the lid. It's like, you have a pot and the lid flips. It's Dan Siegel, he's a psychologist. I heard him first talk about that, which is, it's a bit what you described earlier. The prefrontal parts of your brain go offline and the deeper parts take over, the limbic system and stuff like that. So I heard you you make a discourse in favor of rationality, but there's this thing that humans struggle with, and here I would like again to think about those maybe 40% or more or less of people who have trauma responses. They flip the lid. Their lid flips, and then it may be a smell. It may be a word, it may be an expression, it may be a phrase, it may be also when you get attacked by a tiger, you flip the lid. There's no rationality at that moment for the very good adaptive reason that you don't have time to think.
That's partially wrong. Because your ability to inhibit the limbic response is modulated by how much effort you have put into it previously. So if you are hijacked by a spider, for example, the way of reducing how hijacked you are by it is by exposing yourself to the maximum stimuli that you can without losing control over your psychological state. And if you expose yourself to that and you get used to it, you build an inhibition. Your prefrontal cortex takes control over the situation, over a wider range of situations. And by doing the voluntary exposure to what is the most painful thing you can handle, progressively you build the stronger mind. And it is the opposition to the immediate negative feedback, which is the building of a rotten mind. You have to be able to deal with negative feedback.
It's an interesting thought, and it reminds me of what I read about trauma treatment in the last decades. There's a very interesting researcher that's called Janina Fisher without a C, Fisher, for those people that are interested. And she started out as she's quite old now, I think, but she started out as a trauma psychologist. And trauma was in that time was treated like sit down, relive your trauma, tell me everything about it. We're going to go through it again. And then it will come into your conscious mind. You will understand it, you will give it a place, and then your trauma responses, your traumatic behavior now will go away. And she and a lot of other people had to notice that it doesn't work, because traumatized people simply relive the trauma and they flip the lid again and again and again. So there's no way in which they can really relive this trauma and then simply consciously treat it, integrate it. It doesn't work. Now, it does work for spiders. It does work for spiders, because there you can. It's very how should I say it? Concise. It's a very precise thing. So you can they begin by just looking at a drawing of a spider somewhere far away, and then that you can just handle, and then it becomes always more realistic.
Modulatable.
Yeah. But the thing with these childhood traumas and complex post-traumatic stress disorder is that it doesn't work like that. The exposure thing. So they have this new way of treating this trauma, but I don't know if this is what should really be a topic here. I think that the problem, I have this thought about rationality. To be honest, I always have, and every day a bit more in my feeling, I have the idea or the sensation that rationality is a posteriori, that rational thought is almost always, and I would take away the almost. My sensation is that it's always a posteriori.
Absolutely.
So stuff happens, and then afterwards, just afterwards, you say, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to do this. But actually, it was already on its way, and you were doing it.
I think we talked about this in a previous occasion. I mentioned that
Yeah.
the means by which... we talked about this in the email exchange we had in these weeks after our previous conversation, in which I mentioned that the means by which you are able to judge whether what I'm saying it makes sense or not is a feeling. And the feeling emerges from somewhere you were not feeling before. There's a lot of neural activity going on from which you're not conscious, and it is that leads to the emergence of something conscious in your awareness. You're aware of the thing that boils up from the unconscious, and
exactly.
Absolutely the perception to and this connects with the nonsensical notion of free will, that ultimately if you think of where that thought came from, you realize that it came from somewhere you are not aware of. It has to be that way. Awareness is preceded by non-awareness, and the rational argument that you can build about how something is in some way or in another is preceded by the feeling of how good the thing that you are machinating that moment is.
So this does make me kind of skeptical about the role that rationality can ultimately play. So as I see it, more like just to it's still like forming in my mind there, but I see like the world today in a very crude way painted, like a lot of traumatized people. And also there's a part of, because we don't want to go into the blank slate paradigm where we're all equal and just the same, and then some are traumatized and the others not, and if you would take away trauma, we're all equal and just nice and blank. No, there's a lot of zoological stuff going on. Chimpanzees are not traumatized, and they or not all of them, and they beat each other, and these things happen. But in humanity, I see like there are a lot of traumatized people that relive stuff and it's not really happening. Maybe if you would ask me a lot of stuff like, I'm not going to go into that. That's too non-scientific. I'm going to drop that. But I see a lot of traumatized people that do a lot of stuff that's not adequate because it doesn't respond to the real situation. And then I see a lot of people that are just like living their unconscious life, just to say, and then rationality coming just a posteriori always, explaining it. And then it does happen that you can see something that happens, you process it in your brain, and it helps for the next time. Like I touched something and it hurt me, so next time I won't touch it. But rationality as the driver for a kind of positive change, I don't really have confidence in it. That's not to say that I don't want to diminish it, and I'm a very rational person myself, I would say, whatever that means. But I think it's like I also said that in the emails. I think I have now the impression that I have been occupying myself the last 50 years with a level of things where things are not really happening and are not really changing either, because of this a posteriori effect, actually. And then there's also this flat mind idea. The mind is flat. There's a book that's called The Mind is Flat, which is a bit what you say. So all these things happen. It's like dark artificial intelligence. You know, artificial intelligence that makes itself, and then it comes up with patterns, and no one understands why. And the artificial intelligence can't explain either. It just comes up with them. When you put all this together, I don't know. I'm very skeptical about rationality.
You mentioned that there's some variability, and you were trying to debunk the notion of the blank slate, which is absolutely right. I think the blank slate is just a wrong idea, and it's the dogma that socialists have to adopt in order to be able to start justifying their notions of how everyone is the same, and if you give the right environment or the same environment to everyone will react in the same way. And that's just complete bullshit. And anyone who's doubting this can read The Blank Slate by Steven Pinker, and that's a more rigorous debunking of this bullshit idea than I could do right now. But what I was saying is not that everyone is the same way, which I mentioned when I said that there's a lot of overlap between all the humans, because their differences are relatively minor in comparison to what unites us. And that thing doesn't mean that there's no variability. There's a huge variability. And there's people with different traits, different interests, different predispositions to different things. But the origin of why I mentioned that there's some overlap was the existence of the sadistic nature in humanity. And I was just pointing to the fact that no one is not sadistic at all. Everyone is sadistic in some measure. Some people are much more sadistic than others, but everyone shares some commonality in respect to some percentage of sadism. And then I would like to intertwine this concept, this idea, with the fact that, okay, there's a lot of variability across the population in our society, and that's absolutely right. But that doesn't mean that we cannot have some rules of thumb which apply to everyone. For example, if you tell someone that something they did, if you convince someone that something they did is a sacrilege, and that it is so bad that it is proof of their rotten soul, and that they should be ashamed of it so deeply that we're not even going to talk about it anymore, because this is just so shameful. If you convince someone of that, they will be traumatized by whatever you are saying. And the opposite is also true. If someone does the most brutal thing you can conceive of, and you tell them, oh, that's absolutely normal, and you treat it as if it's something completely banal and something that we do every day, and he buys the narrative that it is normal, he will not be traumatized by decapitating 50 people with a knife, let's say, that he did that. But the opposite is also true. The previous example I mentioned, that if someone, let's say, is using a knife and he's peeling an apple, which is a proper usage of a knife, in case someone is doubting that, and you tell this person that that's the most shameful thing you could ever do, and that it doesn't even deserve future mention. That's the magnitude of the shamefulness of what you're saying, which is wrong, because there's nothing that's shameful enough that doesn't deserve future correction through dialogue. And that's the dogmatic spirit being introduced into the wrongness of the idea. It's not only that you're saying that something is shameful, which is not. It should be dealt with rationally. Shame, I think, it's not a proper response to almost any situation, because it's more of an automatic response like anger. And I think that leaving most of the automatic responses away and taking control of the situation consciously and rationally is a better alternative than just shaming someone to death. And but what I was just trying to posit is that there's no instance, every human, if you convince them, maybe you should take them in a early state in their development in which they are more malleable, because maybe if you do that with someone, they would be hard-headed enough. If you do that with a 50-year-old person, maybe they would already have recognized enough life or patterns in the universe to be able to say that what you're saying is just complete bullshit. But if you do that with a 5-year-old, you can more or less convince them of anything. And if they cut an apple and you tell they're trying to peel an apple and you tell them that that's the most shameful thing in the universe, there's nothing that supersedes that, and that's proof of the rottenness of their soul and that it cannot be corrected. That will traumatize them. And the opposite being true also shows that there's a spectrum in which we can move. And the way you treat previous occurrences determines a big proportion, a huge one, of how traumatic something will be.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I think how traumatic something is depends on if you were able to regulate your nervous system in a lapse of time quite short around or after the event. So if something extremely horrible can happen, you can see someone maybe by an accident or by a crime decapitated in the street, but you can be 6 years old, but you can immediately your parents take care of you and they regulate with you, which will take quite time in such a horrible event, but they regulate with you. In the end, it will not be traumatic. It will be an event that you will remember forever, probably, because the more emotion you have, the deeper the memory gets. But it will not be a traumatic memory. It will be a memory of a terrible event followed by a regulation and then being okay again. On the other hand, if something happens and it doesn't have to be really all that terrible, maybe just you're 5 years old and your parents simply don't talk to you during a whole day, 24 hours, which in itself you would say, well, there's worse than that. If you had no way of regulating and you lived in terror and that terror lasted long enough, it will be traumatizing. So I think it's all, and that also brings in the variability between individuals. For one individual, I talked about CPTSD, complex post-traumatic stress disorder. The PTSD is more widely known, just post-traumatic stress disorder of soldiers. So a lot of soldiers have trauma, very grave trauma. But then again, some of them have probably less trauma than others, although they lived more or less the same thing. And that depends on how your nervous system works and maybe how you learn to regulate also, if you can regulate better or worse. But I remain with a kind of question to you that if we kind of agree that rationality is a posteriori, always, where do you put its how should I put this? Where do you put its creative role in changing behavior towards more happiness? I don't know if that's a weird sentence, but so I'll put it again. If rationality is always a posteriori, how can it be put to use, according to you, to generate more happiness?
I think that's morality. And I want to get into the topic which we didn't touch before. The usage of rationality, or the ability we have to recognize patterns in the world around us to further our objectives, is morality.
But can I put a question, just interrupt you there?
Yeah, sure.
Do you think there's a lack of morality in the world? I don't mean a lack of behavior following the moral rules, but is there a lack of morality? Is morality as such not present enough in education, in culture, in the world? I would say it's present everywhere. It's not omnipresent all over the place.
there's not anymore a unified narrative in such a measure as there was maybe 50, 100 years ago. But there's always been a lot of divergence between the different opinions of people around different populations in the world. There's different customs always in different places, but now, due to the information revolution, people can have different customs and unite with people who have similar customs, not physically, but cybernetically. And I think this is the origin of why there's a lot of segregation in how people think of things, and there's not that much of an consensus in what is right and what is wrong in society. But my point is not to point towards the rightness or wrongness of anything, which I think I could do. But it's just trying to prove how there's no game in town apart from the scientific method. The scientific method, defined broadly enough, is just the way by which we make sense of the world. And if it is not through making sense of something that we can derive a proper morality, there's nothing from which we can derive a proper morality. And even if you derive it from a religious text, let's say I have a friend who derives his morality from religious texts, and I'm a very good friend of him, but I don't agree with him in that the morality is objective. It's also subjective, because your morality, your, let's say, Christian morality in this sense, in this example, depends on you giving credence to the truthness of the text. So there's no alternative to building a tree of knowledge, of hypotheses stacked over each other. And saying that there's a way of having morality which comes from the exterior world, in the sense that it doesn't require interaction with the world, with the physical world, is wrong, because you are giving credence to that hypothesis. And so
Can I ask you another question?
Yeah.
I read in an article that 50% of people in the UK believe in ghosts. And I was utterly shocked by that.
That's not that shocking. 60% of the US citizens don't believe in evolution, or a crazy figure like 40% maybe. That's even more shocking.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if it's more shocking or less, but in that light, do you think? I'm thinking about the scientific method. I think it's very complicated in the sense that 50% of the people in the UK believe in ghosts, which is utterly unscientific. And still, I believe that a part of those that believe in ghosts would consider themselves to be following the scientific method in certain parts of their life. So do you think that applying the scientific method is possible for everyone, or for what kind of percentage of population do you think it applies? And then also, for those who apply it, isn't it simply because it coincides with the way their brain works? I don't think you choose to use the scientific method. I think it's just a way, basically, that your brain works. And then, of course, if you learn about the scientific method, it appeals to you, it pleases you, you use it naturally. But how do you see the place of scientific methods in this whole picture of humanity using it or not using it? And if not everybody can use it, or should or will use it, what's it going to do? Because imagine we are 80% of people using scientific methods, which we are not probably. Then we still have 1 person in 5 that just acts completely differently. What are you going to do with them?
I think that IQ here is the center of the question. Your ability to recognize patterns and extrapolate tendencies, trends from that, and see the further implications of what you're talking. As you mentioned in the previous occasion, that knowledge travels. If you're talking about something that travels, that's deep. That's describing something fundamental about the universe. You've been able to extrapolate the essence of something, and that thing applies to almost everything. That's very deep. And the farther you're able to make these extrapolations, and the more patterns you're able to recognize and make them collide in your mind through the process of natural selection that ultimately is rationality, you have two ideas, and the one that seems the most plausible wins, and it just is shown to you by positive emotion that one is the right one. I think that people with lower cognitive ability would benefit a lot from narrative which is not questioned by them. And this is it. I'm not saying that religious people are stupid or that stupid people are religious. My point is deeper than that. I'm saying that the less capable you are of handling with new information and of updating your priors based on the new evidence you get, the more you would benefit from having some set of traditional values given to you, which are the patterns that have been recognized by society through a lot of generations, that are maximizing your well-being with what you can do with it.
You have a huge problem there. I think, there's this idea that the prohibition of eating pork in Muslim societies stems from this parasite that pigs have and that make people sick. So I think something maybe similar to what you're hinting to might have happened there. So maybe people were using a kind of scientific method because the human brain hasn't changed significantly in like 40,000 or 100,000 years or what. So these people were using scientific methods in their context. So they saw that if you eat pork, you have a high probability of getting this parasite and becoming severely ill. And they also saw that most or a good part of their co-citizens were not able to see that in that way. So they said, God doesn't like it. I think something similar happened. They said, okay, we would like to convince people to stop eating pork, but we cannot explain to them. They just don't follow our reasoning. They are not convinced. So let's put it into a kind of value that we put into scripture, and we say it's forbidden. It's just forbidden. And if you do it, you'll get in so much trouble in your idea. And what is so much trouble in your idea? You'll go to hell. You'll burn in hell forever or whatever. And then people were convinced. But now it's no longer necessary because we can handle pigs that we can raise pigs without these parasites, which is an example of a traditional value that was passed to these non-scientific people, and then the world changes, and then now you can't change the traditional value again, because maybe what you would have to do is a whole shenanigan of proving that you are the new prophet or something. I don't know, with some false miracles or whatever. And then you can write a new book, which maybe some of them will follow, others will not. They'll fight about it. You'll have religious wars. And, how do you handle all that?
I think there's a lot to unpack that there, and I think I won't be able to fully do it. But I think you're right. There's patterns recognized at different time frames, and the ones recognized at thousands of years now are assumed to be correct dogmatically and are not put to doubt. And there should be a way of updating our moral standards in shorter time frames than thousands of years.
And I would also say more, just to between parentheses, science is doubt. It is in its essence doubt all the time, and it's knowing that your model is never exactly correct and that you're always improving it. But that's just the thing. And to come back to intelligence and IQ and stuff like that, in my personal experience, the thing that makes people seem not intelligent is their incapability of doubting. You can just, for me, you can leave the test behind and the IQ and whatever. If someone is willing to doubt continually, I can have a good conversation with them, and we can come to stuff.
My opinion on this converges with yours, I think, in the sense that I've been thinking for a while now that the ability to seek for alternative explanations for the phenomenon that you are describing through your hypothesis, or the ability to steel man the adversary, someone who thinks in another way, is the best proxy for how good a conversation would be with a person. And I'm testing this hypothesis. Maybe it's wrong, and I'm doing it on a personal level, not on a study or anything. But I would like to obviously do a study about this, in which I would see the correlation between how satisfactory a conversation with someone is and the ability they have to steel man alternative hypothesis. If you're able to give a rigorous definition of what socialism is, in a way that a Marxist or a socialist would be incredibly satisfied with it, and would say, oh wow, you've been able to explain socialism better than I could, and you then proceed to debunk it rigorously, you derive a level of respect from me, which saying socialism is evil would not. Because you've proven that you are able to understand every niche and every cranny of the edifice of socialism, and then you destroy it completely, and you prove how the root is rotten. So you see the edifice, you have it in your own mind, and you see the root, and you prove in a very scientific way, by evidence, that the root is rotten. And going back to the example of the pork being forbidden, I think that the process of this prohibition was not conscious on a personal level. Maybe it was conscious at an interpersonal level. I don't know. I don't think consciousness stops at the brain. I think there's consciousness is. I couldn't give a good definition of consciousness, but I think that the process of natural selection that occurs on a neural level on your own brain, that leads to you believing that one idea is right in comparison to another, also occurs at a societal level, with people believing different things, and then the people who believe the right things and are more able to have fitness through the right interpretation of the environment are flourishing, and then are more able to spread their ideas. So I think this is the process that led to the prohibition of pork. It's not as if someone was deliberately thinking in their own mind, okay, this rational argument doesn't make sense, I will have to build some other narrative to put it nicely and decorate it to be able to introduce this meme into the mind of people that they wouldn't accept in other ways. There wasn't a conscious elaboration. It was just people trying different things in a decentralized manner, and the things that sticks is more capable of spreading itself. So the meme of religion is very fitness-giving to itself, in the sense that it spreads a lot. And it has a lot of self-correcting mechanisms in which it prohibits questioning the root of the religion. Dogma is part of religion because it's necessary for religion to be able to prosper in the way that it has, because in the moment you allow some doubting and you prove that the doubt is consequential in a way to disprove your arguments, and it would put your religion at the same level of the other 10,000 religions that have been invented throughout human history, and it would prove that your religion is just one more, and that the difference between you and an atheist is just that you are atheist of one religion less. So what I'm trying to say is that there wasn't a conspiracy or a deliberation, a machination by a single mind, leading to the idea that building the religion would be the only way of making dumb people behave in a way that is aligned with what we consider right now to be correct. I think there were many people doing many things, and the ones who were able to do things that transcended their instance spread more. And through that process, now we see a lot of people, a lot of ideas which are very good at spreading, even if they are not themselves good, like socialism. I think socialism is good at spreading because it feels good to believe in it, but it's bad. And it's the process of the scientific method of realizing the alternatives, to proving that the expropriation of private property by the government is bad, and it leads to a deterioration of the economy, and every variable you can conceive of on a societal level is hindered when socialism is enacted. And in general, free markets are good. And this same example I'm giving with free markets versus socialism can be applied to religions. But this is the root of the question, and I haven't been able to discover a solution. And this, I think this is, I don't know if you know Jordan Peterson, but I believe he's atheist, but he doesn't state it because he believes that the people with lower cognitive ability cannot handle the raw truth of how the scientific method works. They need some helping, some dogmatic assumptions to be able to work to function at the highest level they can. And I think something deep in me tells me that's wrong. That Jordan Peterson should be able to make an explicit statement of his atheism, and that would ultimately lead to the best outcome possible. And maybe he's just separating the population by their ability to understand his message, and maybe the most capable people would understand that he's actually an atheist, and the least capable people, who are also more probable to be religious, would believe that he's religious. So he's adapting his message perfectly to the audience based on how the ability gives them depending on your ability, you position yourself in a different group, and that group, that message that you're interpreting gives you the exact signal you need to further your objectives. And maybe in the same, the world is granular and there's a spectrum. And I think what he's doing is giving us a message which matches the grayness of the world. The more capable you are to understand the hidden message in his narrative, the more you would be convinced of his atheism. Or that's at least my hypothesis, and maybe I'm completely wrong and I'm bullshitting myself. Maybe that's absolutely right. But I'm just saying that the way he's handled the spectrum of population, of people having different abilities, and I think it is true that less cognitively capable people don't flourish that much when they are forced to deal with raw data and to construct out of that hypothesis. They have to be given the hypothesis because they are not good at finding good hypotheses. They very fast fall into a dogmatism of a wrong dogma. They recognize a pattern and they don't question it more. And this converges with your hypothesis that intelligence is your ability to doubt yourself, or different hypotheses, finding alternative evidence, which converges with what I was saying, that the ability to steal man is the best proxy to how satisfactory conversation with you would be. And after all this mumbling that I just did about Jordan Peterson, intelligence, and all these topics, I think that the conclusion here is that I'm ignorant of the best way of arranging society. There's a variability in intelligence, and that's obvious. And we should face this fact with maturity. There's a difference in cognitive ability between people, and the least capable people are just not capable of doing the things that the most capable people are capable of doing. And how we should arrange our society in order to make the maximum amount of flourishing is not self-evident to me. I don't know. Maybe just advocating for the scientific method explicitly and trying to debunk the ideas that are shown to be wrong would be the best way. Or maybe giving the less capable people some kind of dogma to be able to make them be able to have a decent enough life without making them stressed because they are not capable of dealing with the facts in a way that, for example, Richard Dawkins would be, because he's incredibly intelligent. What's your position?
I have a thought here. The thought I had was, I think society cannot be arranged, which is going a root level deeper than how should we arrange it. In the sense that society does not exist. You know what I mean? I don't know if that rings a bell with you somewhere, but for me, society does not exist. What we have is like a chaos model, you know? So you have an enormous amount of individual elements that have their own drives and motors and stuff like that, and kind of connections. And then we have the idea that of arranging this. but it's like arranging molecules of not even one kind of gas, but different kinds of gas due to variability and no blank slate. So you have like a reservoir filled with molecules of gas, and there's temperatures and temperature differences. And then we say, okay, we're going to arrange these molecules. And maybe we're just bullshitting ourselves. What are we, who is arranging what? And how would you do that?
I think society is arranged. It's not about us making the arrangement. It is arranged in some way. Your environment is biased in some way. If you're
It's organic, it's kind of organically arranged. It's just like the molecules of gas in a vat. It arranges itself. Yes and no.
Yeah, the density makes that the lighter gases go up and the more dense gases go down, and that's also a phenomenon that occurs in society. But the word society, my inability to describe society rigorously, doesn't point to the wrongness of my point, because what I'm saying is deeper than the concept of a society. I'm just saying there's different behaviors that we can enact, which would lead to different outcomes. And I'm not sure of what the best way of treating other people is. Is there a single measure or a single idea which you can apply to everyone and make that idea maximize the flourishing that other people generate to other people, just to try to avoid the word society? Because I cannot define it properly enough. Maybe not. Maybe there's not a single message.
I would say definitely not. Definitely not. Due to basically the non-blank slate nature of things. It's just to take an example. If you would just cut the people in two, those who believe in ghosts and those who don't believe in ghosts, you cannot give them the same message. You cannot influence them in the same way. To the one half, you'll have to say, you make those ghosts unhappy or something or whatever. You have to burn a candle, or if you burn a candle and at the same time, I don't know, you eat healthy, then the ghosts will make you healthy or something. I don't know what message you'll have to give them. And to the others, the same message, which would be so inappropriate, and they would be unable to accept it. That is just one very, very crude example. Eh?
I would like to share with you a hypothesis I have and know your opinion, because it deeply touches what we're saying right now. I believe that dialogue can always be had, no matter the level of dogmatism in society or in anyone you're talking to. If, for example, I'm a Nazi and you are trying to convince me of the wrongness of my ideas, I have a dogmatism making me point my gun to you if you negate the truthness of my claims. But what that means is that I have antibodies against the attack to the idea. So the ideas build antibodies, and the antibodies are dogmatism, aggression, violence towards suppressing the differing ideas. And this is where my point comes. Those antibodies themselves do not have antibodies. So if you come to me, I'm a Nazi in this example, instead of criticizing Nazism, if you criticize the fact that Nazism cannot be criticized, if you do a meta-analysis, you attack the antibodies, and then you can attack the being itself, because you deplete itself. You deplete him of antibodies. And maybe the antibodies themselves have also some other smaller antibodies, and you would be able to fight those because you're strong enough. So you have to be strong enough to fight the antibodies of a certain idea. And the antibodies are analogous to the dogmatism in a society. So if I cannot make a claim because people are going to be dogmatic about this idea, that means that claim is protected by antibodies. And this happens with feminism, ecologism, anti-racism. There's a lot of topics, even COVID or 9/11, there's a lot of topics with which people are dogmatic about these matters, and they are not able to hear alternative explanations of what they believe. They happen to believe a thing, and if you tell them something else, they don't believe it. And the thing is that with this example of the Nazi person, you can attack the lack of freedom of speech, let's say. So I cannot attack Nazism directly because that would put the other person against you. But you can attack the lack of freedom of speech. You just say, you can make the case for freedom of speech. You can say...
Can I interrupt just a moment? Because I would go... Okay, I would go a completely different route. To take your example of the Nazi with the gun, I would say this person feels in danger. That would be my first approach. If all would go well, because probably my lid would be flipped and I would do something very emotional and stupid. But now that I'm not in the situation, this person feels in danger. And as I was saying, I would probably flip my lid with a gun in front of my head. So I would do something emotional and stupid, or maybe emotional and very smart also, might be. But he feels in danger. So he's in, you have fight, flight, freeze, fawn, and cry for help reactions to danger. And he's in the fight. He's in a fight mode. So I think his lid is flipped. If someone points a gun to me, his lid is flipped. And there is no use whatsoever in trying to establish a rational connection with this person at that moment. First, the gun should go away, and we should both regulate our nervous system and be calm and curious and stuff like that, and maybe compassionate and stuff like that, that these basic stuff comes up, and then we can dialogue. And it also, it marked me a bit that you said, I can attack his idea. This is also a fight response in a certain way, but in the mental realm. While actually what's going on, and there's again my idea of rationality a posteriori, and there's it's this, his idea of Nazis and all that stuff, and your idea of Nazism and whatever it can be, is a small layer on top of a huge reality of someone in terror and another person also in terror. The first person is terrorized and feels that he can only be safe within the Nazi group and with a gun in his hand pointing to your head. And you're terrorized because you have a gun pointing to your head, which is an extreme example, but in general, it's what happens. So, for instance, if you have a discussion about politics and you have a socialist and a capitalist or a liberalist or whatever, the same thing will happen. And I think it's the number one mistake that everyone all the time makes. Instead of actually going into, okay, like, I don't know, it's not like you have a recipe questions for that, but the gist of it would be, what kind of primal fear is your idea calming for you? And then you can go further, and you will meet each other there, because we have the same fear. If you're a socialist and I'm a liberalist, we have the same fear. We have these kind of survival fears and stuff like that. And you think you can solve it with socialism, and you feel very, very threatened by people who put into question your socialism, and vice versa. So I would go that route.
Yeah, but that's a difference in the state of mind of the person, not a difference in the fundamental idea being held to be true. I can be a socialist and simultaneously be calm and be rational and capable of dealing with different ideas, or I can be a socialist and be hijacked by the least amount of questioning of my hypothesis. So I think those are two different dimensions. The magnitude of your hijacking and the idea you hold. Maybe
I think if you're an ist, then you will easily be hijacked and flip your lid. If you're an ist, social ist, liberal ist.
There's a correlation there. Yeah. Because you attach, in the moment you say the ist, you are attaching your idea, your ideology to your identity, and that makes you less capable of dealing with facts rationally. But I think this is more of a side point. And what I was trying to say is that there's a difference between idea and the state of rationality with which you are facing the situation. And I think that if you do not take into account if I do not take into account your irrationality, I am irrational. And this perfectly pertains to what you were saying, in that in order to be able to escape from a robbery that they are putting a gun into my head successfully, the right way of doing that wouldn't be to shout truths, literal truths. I wouldn't say to the person who's putting the gun into my head that putting a gun into my head is wrong, and that robbing is wrong, and you should just do something productive, get a job, and stop taking drugs, and do productive things with your life. That's not the mechanism that's going to maximize the well-being at the longest time frame. Because if I say that, I increase the odds of being shot in the head. So the best thing I could do is just say, what do you want? You want money? I can give it to you. Please don't kill me. And then you give the money to him, and maybe you leave, and you have successfully escaped death. And then in that moment, you call the police, you identify the dude, you put him into prison, and you make them go through a process of rehabilitation because he's evidently not capable of being part of society yet. Or another alternative would be to just exert power against him. If you're just more powerful than him and you have another gun and you shoot him before he shoots at you, that's it. You've won the conflict. Because you either establish an interaction through trust or through violence. Because violence is a way of interacting which doesn't require trust. I don't have to trust you if you're dead. Dead people don't lie. So if let's say we want to solve a problem, you have an apple and I want it, we can either dialogue and I can offer you an alternative. I can offer you a peer or a speaker or something that you might appreciate more than the apple. Or I can coerce you into giving me the apple. And if coercion is taken far enough and the stakes are high enough, you're going to be willing to fight to death. Because let's say we're discussing the reproductive ability of your wife and your family. I'm saying I'm going to rape your family and I want to do that. And so that's just so important in the life of any person in this world that anyone would be willing to fight to death to avoid that from happening. And so if stakes are high enough, we're going to solve this problem not with dialogue, because that possibility is not going to be put into the table. It's not even going to be negotiated through dialogue. If I tell you, would you mind if I had sex with your wife? That would be just a stupid question. It's not something that we have to be even negotiating. So the next step would be, I'm going to take power over this situation physically, and I'm going to have sex with your wife against your will, and this is going to be solved through force. And because we haven't been able to establish a rational discussion in which trust could be built, we are now forced to deal with the situation without trust. And the only non-trustful manner of solving a dispute is with violence and seeing who survives, if the stakes are high enough. If they are not high enough, we can separate ourselves, you can escape, you can go somewhere else, and the problem will be solved. But if their stakes are high enough and there's no alternative, whoever survives in this physical confrontation will be the one who proves who was right about the confrontation.
I think the notion of trust is a very interesting one. And I was thinking, who will you trust? I think the answer is the person that recognizes your pain and acknowledges your pain and is willing to help you experience less pain. And you have to feel all that. And so if you have a discussion, for instance, about politics, the socialist with the liberalist, what usually happens in my experience is that both flip the lid. They both flip the lid. And then it may appear a rational dialogue, but actually, because you have quite a few people that are capable of apparenting a rational dialogue while their lid is flipped. And you will see that it's a fruitless discussion. It can be very polite, it can be very civilized, but it's fruitless because they are defending their tower, each for themselves, because they don't come out of their tower and then meet each other and say, okay, dude, we both have this fear, we both have this problem, we have this pain. And then you're trying to solve it, I'm trying to solve it, we meet there. And that would be trust.
That's my hypothesis is precisely this. In the hierarchy of values, at the top of it, there's capitalism. I believe that free markets and private property and rule of law are the means by which we maximize flourishing at a societal level. But beneath that, something even deeper than that, is the presupposition that flourishing is something to be achieved. Or maybe freedom of speech is beneath that. And then deeper than freedom of speech is, why do you want freedom of speech? Because that's what maximizes flourishing. And then maximizing flourishing would be even a step deeper in my hierarchy of values in life. And then even deeper than seeking flourishing would be nothing, because that's just a presupposition. It's the naturalistic fallacy. Because of believing that flourishing is good, is that I can exist. My existence requires that I have some kind of feature which allows my existence. If I'm against that feature, I stop existing. And so the fact of me having that feature makes me want to have that feature in the future, and that justifies itself. And so the naturalistic fallacy is not a coherent philosophical concept, because at the root of every epistemological hierarchy, there's a naturalistic fallacy the size of a building which cannot be destroyed. And what I was just trying to say is, picture the hierarchy of my values. At the top, capitalism. At the bottom, the fact that I have to seek for human flourishing because the alternative is destruction. And if I have a dialogue with a Marxist, one of the branches of this tree wouldn't be equal. It would be different. But we would have overlap at the level of free speech, let's say. Or maybe not. Maybe he says that dogmatism is good to further his agenda, as I mentioned in the previous podcast. So he would say that human flourishing is good, but freedom of speech is not the means by which we can achieve that. And it would be by some kind of dogmatism that the state should have more power. But then we can establish dialogue through the finding of a common ground. So what is the closest place in our hierarchies of knowledge which overlap between you and I? And if we both go to that place in which we have overlap, we can start a dialogue and understand why you want in one direction and I want to another based on the same root point. We both want human flourishing, so why is it that you want dogmatism? And why is it that they want freedom of speech?
You might have someone that doesn't want human flourishing, like an ecological radicalist that says humans should disappear or there should only be 100 left, and you have to go even deeper.
Exactly.
So I think a good discussion in this respect would begin with quite some time of asking why.
Exactly.
Why do you think capitalism is good? Because of this. Why do you think this is good? Why do you need this one? And what does it calm in you? In the end, all these ideas are there to manage fear and pain and stuff like that. And so you'll have to meet, as you say, deep enough, which is not what's usually happening. So actually, if you're with the Nazi, with the gun, you should try to do that, which I don't think you will be humanly able. You would have to be so maybe desensitized to having guns put to your head that your lid wouldn't flip. But that would be, you would have to say, what can I do for you? What are you afraid of? And I'm not threatening you, and something like that. Go into the
You have to first you have to put the stakes low enough so that the other person is willing to have dialogue instead of constantly trying to exert power over you. And once he's willing to just chat, you can start the why process, by which it's 100% effective means by which to deconstruct an idea, if you are capable enough of performing it, to find common ground and then from that discover who was right. That's applying the scientific method. Through whys, you discover the overlap. I think I love this metaphor that you mentioned with the whys. And I think this could be the origin of a book that could be written, I don't know if by me or by someone else, but if someone else wants to take this idea, they could do it, as maybe why as a guaranteed means by which to establish dialogue or something like that. That would be a great book. And I think millions of people would have to read it, because this would be incredibly valuable as an insight, I think.
Yeah, how to establish the base on which dialogue can happen to begin with. And once you have the base, the dialogue will be good and fruitful and accepted by everyone. But so often this base isn't touched, right? And you have just the two towers being defended.